Hello there, folks. Before we start with the interview, I'd just like to quickly introduce Mr. Lillie to you. He's a comic artist and he's been creating his webcomic for well over 15 years together with his wife. So, they have quite a bit of experience behind their backs. Links to their website and other useful links will be located in the description below.
I believe the first question was if I could say one thing, the most important thing I could to someone starting a webcomic, what would that thing be? All right, and it's going to sound a little bit trite, but honestly, the most important thing when you're starting a webcomic is you have to absolutely love creating for its own sake. Even if the only result is, like, you don't have a big success or money or a big audience, if you just wind up making the thing that you wanted to make, that has to be enough that it's like worth it for you. It's understandable to kind of get like wrapped up in the money metrics and momentum stuff, but that is a definite recipe for unhappiness. If you're in it for the wrong reasons, it will distort your focus and undermine your satisfaction. So you just actually have to genuinely love and enjoy what you are doing, because it's also like trying to become successful in the independent realm of art. It's very difficult. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you're doing something for 5 years and you're extremely good and you start to get some traction, that's fast, I would say. That's actually pretty fast to be having things begin to go well. So if you're not like authentically having a good time and feeling rewarded with the activity and with the effort itself, it's just going to grind you down and create so much bitterness. So I'd say that's the most important thing, is actually enjoy what you're doing just for its own sake. And then, of course, the whole like marathon goes to the second most important thing. If I'll just like sneak that in there, which is don't give up. If you really love what you're doing and you're serious about trying to turn it into a career as well, it is a marathon and you're going to have to be slogging through it and just trucking along for a long time. And on top of that, you're going to have to try to be like learning and adapting as you go.
I'd just like to comment on that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense actually, and I've heard that a lot of times throughout my art journey and everything, that you don't make art for money. That's just a bad financial idea. You do it because you love it, and that's the thing that will get you through the tough times, because you want to tell a story or do something. There's just something inside you that you want to express, and that will keep you going further than you simply wanting to make loads of cash. Yeah. And it's very reaffirming that I hear even from you as the most important thing. It makes sense with the amount of content that's on the internet, with everybody being able to make stuff. There's loads and loads of comic artists. Just going to a comic, like sort of a rate website where you can see new comics and how people rate them, there's thousands on thousands. So it makes a lot of sense that you gotta love what you're making, or it's just not gonna last.
Moving on to the next question, you were saying, what was the biggest obstacle or problem we had to overcome, and are there any that are still around but we simply had to kind of learn how to cope with them? I would say the biggest overall obstacle is hostile marketplace conditions. Any forms?
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is the traditional comic industry is one part of it, and it's had a distribution monopoly where Marvel, DC, these other companies have kind of got these private backroom deals with Diamond Distribution. And for a long time, for decades, literally, Diamond Distribution was the only way that you could get into comic shops. So they would literally flood competitors and indies right off the shelves and eat up the shelf space. And so it's been actually very difficult to try to get anything into comic shops if you're not Marvel or DC. And even beyond that, in like smaller subgenres and subcultures, like even, for example, in the furry culture, we've had people, I guess like a lot of people, the gatekeepers essentially, soft shadow ban us from having tables at conventions and being able to deal at conventions and stuff. Just because at some point they got it in their head that we were like bad people for whatever reason. And there you go. We're not allowed to actually be at conventions effectively anymore. Now, there's like one or two conventions that have been really spectacular, and they've been the exception to the rule. But like, for example, I think the big one is Anthrocon. We had a dealer's table there for over 12 years. And then as soon as we put our petition out, which we don't need to get into that because it's a really ugly can of worms on the side. Yeah, if anyone's really curious, I think we've got some journals on DeviantArt, and we've written some articles in the past year that sort of go into that. But anyways, a very, very stable table for 12 years, extremely popular, building up a fantastic audience. And then these kind of gatekeeper figures that they don't really do anything creative in the industry. And for some reason, that doesn't really matter because what they want is control. They're not really doing things creatively. They're not making books. They're not making, animations. What they want is to be picking winners and losers. And because they want control way more than the artists, like the artists are generally just like, nose to paper, having a blast making things. But the people that really want control, they go after it hard. And so they get it. And they end up being in the gatekeeper positions of these creative marketplaces. And so that's just, I don't think that's new, like right now in this time and age. I think it's just a little exaggerated due to social media. But that is a challenge, is a hostile marketplace. If you're not like in with the right people, they can really try to exert a lot of pressure to keep you down. And I think the way that we've dealt with that, I think is probably, it's the way I prefer to deal with it. And I think it's the best way, which is not to necessarily spend lots of time and energy railing against how unjust it is. Like, I don't want people to be coming over to our stuff and looking at our comic and our story, and then they have to put up with me like bitterly complaining nonstop, on my Twitter feed or whatever. Like, I want them to come over and have something that they can enjoy, have some cool characters and some neat fantasy and something that they can escape into and have a good time with. So, and I don't think that it really tends to accomplish that much to be railing against injustice anyways. So, like, I've found the best defense against all of this is if other people are going to be negative and, do a lot of unfair, nasty things, that's what they're going to do. Let them do it. I'm not in a position to stop it. I'm not the gatekeeper for those spaces. So I'm just going to focus on making the best content that I can, making stuff that's really fun and imaginative and colorful, and trying to find more ways to deliver that to the people that would really like to enjoy it. And I feel like if you just keep on doing that, keep your head down, don't engage in like the ugliness of the internet drama stuff, then over time, people like it might be a lot harder to get traction that way. That approach, it doesn't have the most like fireworks. It doesn't necessarily feel like, yeah, I'm winning a battle. But the thing is, even if you win that battle, it's like, what do you get? You spent a lot of time and energy on something that is not creating cool stuff. You spent a lot of time and energy on like trying to convince people that bad people are bad. I don't know. It's just not what I want to spend my time on. So maybe the hostile marketplace conditions, they do have an impact. They do make it harder to make things, and they make it harder for people to find what they love. But I think the best way around that is just to keep on creating really cool stuff. Don't quit. Focus on what you love. Try to share what you love with other people. And eventually, with enough time, you start to get people attracted to you, and you build up your own marketplace that's around what you're doing. And at that point, the gatekeepers can't really do anything about it. And sometimes that makes them very angry, but that's also not the point. Like, they can be happy, they can be angry. The point is you're making something you love and other people can enjoy it. And that's exactly where we all want to be, I think. I think question number 3, this was getting into like more nuts and bolts practicality. How did you approach finding a host website, tips, personal preferences, and how does getting a website to host your webcomic even work?
I wanted to ask here about what sort of things should an artist look for in a host? What would be better for him? What would be worse? What price range should he be aiming for? Even if there is a price range, what should he expect from both a financial side and from a side of flexibility with different hosts?
Yeah. I would say, generally speaking, I would advise kind of starting as simple and basic as possible with a website host, because especially when you're starting out, you don't necessarily want to take like a huge amount of resources and just dump it into a website that is something that you're not quite sure how to use anyways. For example, when we started out, this was actually this was like a second place runner up for what's the biggest problem with starting a webcomic. Like, the second biggest problem is kind of having to do everything entirely ourselves. So for example, when we started a website, I didn't really know how to make a website, but there was no way I had the money to hire a web designer. So I just was like, well, I guess I guess learning to make a website is a thing that I'm going to do now. So, I learned some HTML. I had a good friend help teach me a little bit of PHP, and I was able to fortunately put a website together. And just getting a domain, and I don't even have a whole lot of extensive experience with different hosts and servers and things. I just went the most basic, easy thing, which was kind of the McDonald's of websites, GoDaddy. I was like, okay, can I get domains through GoDaddy? Can I get some basic server space through GoDaddy? There we go. I was able to do it relatively affordably. I think, sometimes if you get a domain that no one else is gunning for, if you get a nice unique one, it can be pretty cheap. It can be $12, $15 a year. If you add privacy protection, $24 a year. Server space is a little more expensive, but even if you're just getting the most basic stuff, it can be relatively affordable. We're talking maybe a couple $100 a year, nothing too extreme. So that should be enough to get you just a basic website. And most of these services now, I don't think they did back then when I was starting out so much, but now they all kind of give you these free website builder templates. So you can get a pretty decent looking website without the need to have a lot of understanding of HTML or coding or any of that stuff.
To what you said, I'd just like to ask, what is server space or something like that? You said something with server. I have no idea what that is, so possibly to the listeners or viewers. What is
sure.
that server space?
I will explain it right now. The basic way that a website works is you need two basic ingredients, and then you can put a website on the internet. And one ingredient is you need a domain name, which is, we've got dreamkeeperscomic.com. So you need to have some sort of name where when people type that into their browser, that browser is actually going to go somewhere. Yeah. And that is called a domain name. Domain name. And I think that gets registered in a domain name registrar. And there's various ways to purchase a domain name, but I think for someone, because I'm not even that tech savvy, just going on GoDaddy and grabbing one, it's a pretty solid way to pick up a domain name. Now, one thing, and if it's not a .com, there might be the .net available, or .crap. There's lots of other little things you can stick on the end. Whenever you can, you want to try to get .com because it's got a little more panache to it. I think
it's a good old classic.
Yeah, I think for CouchCon we went with .org because there's someone sitting on the .com that wanted a fortune for it. One thing though, if you are in the process of thinking about getting a domain name for my site. If you're searching around that domain name in GoDaddy or something, be ready to buy it and know what your price ceiling is right away. Because if you search around for a domain name, their system is going to detect that there's interest in it, and they will jack up the price for the next time someone's looking for it. So don't necessarily be searching domain names and planning for the future. Kind of know what do I want, what's in my budget. And so when you go in there and you find it, or you find something that's acceptably close to it, if it's in your budget that you've already decided is a good budget for you, go ahead and pull the trigger on it because they might try to jack that price up later.
Okay, so basically prepare a name, or at least the boneworks of a name that you want, and be ready to take it when you see it with a certain budget limit. Because, of course, the sites will play it smart and see that you want it, so they'll jack up the price. So what's the general pricing of these things? Let's say I'm going to do, I don't know, a3comics.com or something with my name or nickname. It's probably hasn't been searched that much around. What sort of price range should I expect?
I would say I've seen domain names for really cheap. I'm talking $16 to $30 a year, something like that. So
it's a yearly thing.
Yeah, usually through GoDaddy at least. And there's probably other ways to do it, but again, I don't have extensive experience. But through GoDaddy, which is the most simple way to do it, I don't really need to know much of anything. It's just a yearly rate. If you want to pay a little more, you can get 3 years at a X% discount or something. Mm-hmm. But really the domain names, I found, as long as it's not a really in-demand name, as long as it's not I think I'll try to reserve porn.com. It's that'd probably cost a lot of money. But if it's just some domain name that's really unique, no one's ever really searched it before, I think I'm going to reserve Darkwing57thecomic.com. Probably no one's ever thought of that before. So at that point, I would expect something in the range of like tens of dollars for a year of that domain.
And do these, let's say GoDaddy, does it increase or decrease in price throughout the years, or does it usually stay flat with the price?
I have found that it stays relatively stable. They do try to juice it up. Like one thing that they will do is they'll say, you'll be checking out and you're like, hey, $12. This is a great price for a domain name. But then when you're checking out, they'll be like, oh, would you also like privacy protection? Because if you don't have privacy protection, we'll just let anybody look up your info when they're looking up who owns this domain. So then it's like, oh, I do want privacy protection. And then at that point, it's like an extra $20 a year or something. But
Cool.
we're not talking about anything too completely insane.
Yeah. Do you think you need these things like privacy protection?
I would always advise it because you don't know when you're going to have someone insane out to get you on the internet, and you don't want that to turn into a real life situation.
Yeah, that could get scary.
So, two ingredients for having a website. One part that you need is a domain name, and the other part you need, because if you have a domain name, that's all well and good, but that doesn't really put your website files on the internet. You just have a domain name. So what is a server? And basically a server is a computer that is full-time. It's just hooked up to the internet. So when people click on your website domain, like those servers, like that's actually where your pictures and your website page files and all that stuff is stored. And whenever people are like clicking on your website domain, they're actually zipping into those servers, and that's where they can actually look at your website, because servers are what your website files are all hosted on, and they are hooked up to the internet 24/7. And so there's a lot of different places you can get servers, and again, the McDonald's option is probably GoDaddy. Excuse me, you can get, and it is more expensive than a domain name because you're paying to have your files on computers that are hooked up to the internet year round, and they have like maintenance costs and power and all that stuff. But so that's basically what a domain name and what a server is. That's kind of like what they're about. So yeah, that's a domain name and that is a server. And server space, I usually, when I started out, I could get it between $80 to $100 a year for like the lower level plans. That won't handle a ton of traffic, but especially if you're starting out, you don't really need to handle a ton of traffic. Now, as time goes on, you may want to upgrade your website, because there are things like, if you want to, like, say, have a newsletter, you're going to need to have it professionally managed at some point, and so you might have to pay an outside service like MailerLite or MailChimp. I prefer MailerLite. If you want to sell things to people through your website, you might need to actually buy a third-party shopping cart service, and that's going to be like, another like $30 to $40 a month. That depends on the service. So there are things that can start to make it more expensive, but generally I would say you don't really need those right off the bat, and you will kind of know when you do need to start adding those things, and it'll be like when you're actually getting more traction and you have a need for them.
How does this need show itself?
I would say through purchases. Like, for example, for us, if we were going to have an online store, sorry, I'm distracted by alerts over there. But if we were going to have an online store, we were selling books for a long time through our PayPal. And as we started to sell more books through our PayPal, and we had more merchandise and we had more things, using PayPal buttons, it just got harder and harder to keep track of everything effectively. Like, they physically worked, but we couldn't really track inventory or any number of things that we wanted to do. So eventually we were like, you know what? This is also not the most convenient for people to navigate. PayPal doesn't work for everybody. So at that point, when you're just having difficulty sort of juggling fulfillment and orders and logistics, at that point you start looking at things like an online store a little more seriously. But I would say, like, kind of start with like a basic, simple approach first, and then as things scale up, you will know when you kind of need to make things more optimized and more streamlined. But you don't necessarily want to start out, like with a webcomic that people are not reading yet, and it doesn't really have any traction or any sales yet. You don't necessarily want to start out loading up with like super expensive server space to handle millions of visitors and like an expensive online store that's running you like $50 a month and all these like extra bells and whistles. Because at that point, you're just going to be paying for stuff that you're not in a position to get the value out of it at that stage.
Yeah. And if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask, with your current, the people visiting your website, the number of them, and with the amount of server space you have now, with several volumes of your comic on your website, how much, or just an estimate, does that cost you a month or a year? So the viewers can have an idea of what they're getting into and how much money should they be saving up for maybe the future.
I would say it's hard to estimate because we just transitioned to the new website system, and I will say that's why it's. But I would say it's actually legitimately difficult for me to estimate the change in our website costs at this exact moment because I'm a little behind on accounting this year. I've been running so hard trying to get the Volume 5 merchandise and fulfillment on the tracks that I'm not really caught up on accounting. And this is the year that we did transition to a totally new website system. Like up until now, I was doing all the website entirely myself by hand, which is why I could just barely have the skill to get it to kind of look good on a desktop, but on mobile devices, it was not pretty. So, but Vivid is doing well enough that this was finally the first point in history, the first point in like 15 years when I had the ability to get someone professional to actually make a website that was functional and up to modern standards. So that's been really exciting. I don't think the server space is going to cost us that much more. And honestly, I think also because the new website system, we've got our own integrated shopping cart. We've got our own integrated email subscription service management. And so all of that bundled together, I think it's actually going to wind up being the same or possibly less than it was when we had all those services like separately through other companies that we've been paying in the past. But I would say there's always like expenses that creep up. It's gonna be easily a few $100s a year, even for basic website stuff. And I would just kind of assume that that's something that that's going to be basically what it costs to keep the lights on. And if you are getting so much traffic that you really need to upgrade your server space or something like that, then you should be hopefully monetizing that traffic or making merchandise that those people are interested in. So that kind of growth should be kind of paying for itself. And if it's not, then you kind of have to look into, okay, I have a ton of people that love my stuff and they're interested and they're here, but how can I get them to help out with the website because the website needs more support? So at that point you would look into if you've got too much traffic and there's just no sales at all, try to figure out, hey, if you guys would be interested in picking something up for my online store, like what kind of stuff would you like of my series? And just actually ask your customers because they're the best people that would know what they might be into.
The making your own store is quite a big beast for me. The only way I've been trying to think of that would be as the popularity picks up, maybe setting up a sort of semi-store, sort of like Redbubble, if you know what that is. There's just basically online stores where you can put your designs. You get a fraction of the actual price of the t-shirt, but they take care of all the other stuff for you. So that could be quite a comfortable choice.
Yeah,
but
it is
really
nice. Yeah, it's nice that they handle fulfillment. They handle like usually sales taxes and all that kind of stuff. So that's a really good way where you're not going to be making a ton of money, but it's going to allow for there to be some kind of margin of benefit as you get people that are into that stuff. So
yeah, you're basically paying for comfort.
Yeah,
it's either you do it by hand and you get the money, or you let someone else handle it and you get a little bit less. That's just how it works.
Yeah, and I would say generally speaking, especially for newer creators that are starting out, I would say that's probably the way to go because you want to spend a lot of your time creating your actual content and also trying to engage with new readers and like deliver your content to people that might enjoy it. And that stuff is no joke. That takes a ton of time and effort and skill and focus. So the less time you have to spend on managing a store and product lines and fulfillment and like returns and all the other things that come along with like managing an online retail system, the less you have to do that in the beginning, probably the better. Now, I mean, there's kind of exceptions. Like I would say, for example, one obvious exception is when you have like a book release or a crowdfunding campaign. At that point, you want to try to, as much as possible, deliver the book from you to the customer and try to give it some kind of personal touch so they understand that it's like a special process for you and that it's going to be something that they feel is special as well. But you don't necessarily want to spend all of your time putting that personal touch onto like, every single trinket that is in a Redbubble store. Mm-hmm. At that point, that stuff is kind of like just a little bit of an extra booster that gives you a little something for your readers, a little something for you. And so that stuff is really good for starting out.
Yeah, and I mean, today there's a lot of these more creator-friendly websites. One that I know of is Surfshark. I've seen a lot of people who are in the creative business, either artists or animators, advertise the website a lot. And it seems, though I haven't checked it out myself, it seems like the website is sort of by artists, for artists, with the making it easier for you to get your merch out, but also giving you a bit more than any other just make your own t-shirt website.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of choices today, thankfully.
It's one of the nice things is I remember back when we were starting out 2005, I think it was like there was Cafe Press. That was about it. There was definitely not the cornucopia of different store services and options, and even like servers, and crowdfunding did not yet exist. That had not yet been invented when we were starting out. So there's definitely a lot more options now. In fact, I think one of the challenges now can be like selecting which option you should really be investing your time in as compared to other options. Because even maintaining social media sites, it can be a challenge, because if you want to have a footprint on multiple social media sites, which is advisable, then suddenly that's like, are you going to be missing questions on like half of them? Like, can you maintain a dozen different social media sites on different platforms? And if you just put all of your chips into Twitter, like I'm just going to be really active on Twitter, I'm going to build up a huge audience and engage with people. Because of the current nature of social media sites, you as a user, you effectively have no rights. And the website can absolutely destroy everything that you have worked for. So if you think of social media as an investment, if you think of your time as an investment, you can invest in these platforms and you can grow your readership there, and you can invest years of yourself. And one moderator gets a bug up their butt, all of that can be gone. Even the Hampshire guy, he's one of our Vivid Publishing authors. I think it was this year before his book launch, his entire Twitter, and he had been building up all these followers, and he was extremely popular on Twitter. No explanation, no rules, policy, no violation, no nothing. They just wiped it off the face of the earth. So that's the kind of trade-off with social media, is it's that and the blacklisting, beyond just the direct banning, there's shadow banning.
Yeah, I hope he's doing well. And I mean, the social media is always a gamble, especially these days when it's sort of everything's getting political. Everybody can get butthurt any moment, and you just look wrong at the wrong guy, and you're just gone. So I agree. It's good to have these backups, like maybe have a Facebook group or something, or Discord. Discord is pretty good right now, pretty stable seems. But surely not making so many backups that you end up just focusing on them instead of making the actual comic.
I think there was like a later question where I talked a little bit about this. So this is just kind of like a topic we were going into anyway, which is like you've got to have some diversification on your social media platforms, but ultimately you don't necessarily want to be building your career, because if you're trying to build an indie comics career and you're really serious about it, I mean, you're basically this is like your life, this is your livelihood. You don't really want to be building all of this in something that is so volatile and unstable as social media. So you have to view social media not as like the end-all be-all destination of your value. You have to view it as like a fishing hook that you can put out there. And when you get a following on social media, when you get people that are like, if your social media starts to grow, like that is good. Just bear in mind, it could vanish at any moment. So all those people on social media, periodically, you do want to try to pull them into an email newsletter. And I would not recommend MailChimp, because MailChimp has been known at this point to actually deplatform people from MailChimp. And it's like, you'd think this is an email newsletter service. If somebody says, I want to get on this person's email list, I want to get emails from them, and that person's like, yes, I would like to send you emails. Everyone can unsubscribe whenever they want. Let's do this. And then MailChimp comes in and they say, no, we don't like this person, so you may not get emails from him. So I can't believe that they were doing that. But years ago, they started deplatforming people. Of course, it was stupid and political. So I got out of MailChimp as fast as I could. Mailer Lite, Lite, has been cheaper than MailChimp, and also I think same functionality, if not better functionality.
Yeah, one thing, if you wouldn't mind, I'd just like to interdict here. You said you worked on the comic from 2005.
Yes.
Is that from 2005?
Well, technically, the concept was in the works 2004, maybe even 2003, because it was in development when I was in college. I had the idea to make it a TV show. So I was developing Mace and Lilith and Nama, and that I was developing all the characters to be characters in an animation. And then around 2005, I realized, due to the nature of the animation industry, the odds of me retaining creative control were extremely low, especially being like some nobody from an Ohio art college. So at that point, I wanted to tell the story my way. So I was like, you know what? I have $0. There's no money. I cannot possibly afford to hire anyone to animate. Animating it myself, it'll turn into a thief and cobbler type situation. So, but what can I do? Well, I can make a comic. So at that point, 2005, I shifted into making Volume 1, and I got it out, I think, late 2006. You do get a lot of experience. So, but yeah, anyways, I wanted to finish up on the basic idea of you do need to be on social media. That is an outlet that you have to have. But you want to try as much as you can to funnel your people that follow you from social media. And, not all the time, because people don't like to be constantly advertised to. But you want to try to get them into your website, because that is a space that you have more control over than social media. It's a lot harder to just ban someone from their website. I mean, it can happen. GoDaddy is not the best with that track record either. But anyways, a website is more secure than social media, and especially an email newsletter list. So you want to get your customers to your website. You want to get them to your newsletter. You want to get them into spaces that you control, that you own, because that way, if a social media site suddenly gets like nuked because someone goes online and says, "Hey, this guy's actually like a 17th century Gregorian communist," and then some mods like, "I hate communists," or "I hate like people that are from extinct political movements. This guy's gone." That way, you can lose your social media platform, but all the people that were still really into your stuff, you've still got their email. You can still send them updates, and you can be like, "Hey, I lost my Twitter. I'm going to get a new one over here," or whatever you need to do. So get on social media. You probably want to have your eggs in more than one basket, because it's also nice to have something. Like we're on Telegram. We've got a lot of followers building up on Telegram now. So have more than one basket, but ultimately you do want to be trying to funnel people into spaces that you control, spaces that cannot just be pulled out from under you by random, moderators that have nothing to do with anything. At this point, like especially for people that are trying to make a career where their primary source of advertisement, is the internet, it's just a reasonable insurance policy. It's like cancel insurance. Just make sure that you have some sort of archive or backup or system of connecting with your audience that is not reliant on Mark Zuckerberg.
Yeah, cancel insurance sounds really good.
That's what it is. You have to think of it like that. You have to think of like your online strategy as including cancel insurance, because again, this stuff can strike anybody for pretty much any reason. You can get canceled even if you're not doing something. If someone just makes some crazy accusations, or if some news article like starts doing some hit pieces on you, the social media companies, they don't have any kind of like due process or anything they have to follow.
Yeah, well, they don't need to care.
Yeah, like why would they care? They have no moral, they have no legal obligation to care. They obviously don't give a rip about people where their livelihood depends on that platform. They'll just remove you if it's convenient. And I think increasingly too, I know that people like to turn it into like, oh, the bad political people are pro canceling. I'm so good with my political views. But you know what? Really, these huge tech companies, whichever side of politics is in power, they're probably going to be lining up with that side. So if you think that your guys are good and the other guys are bad, just give it time, because eventually the tech companies are part of a massive establishment. So long story short, the establishment is going to enforce whatever narrative they want to enforce. The establishment is going to change based on the weather, essentially. So sooner or later, everyone's going to get their chance to get like deplatformed and censored and crushed by massive corporations. And so
Yeah,
you
well,
just want to make sure that don't count on like your side winning or anything like that. You just got to make sure have some cancel insurance in your online portfolio of marketing.
yeah. I mean, you should never count on big corp to have your back or anything, because the big companies, they always go where the money flows, and if you're on the other side of the river, you're gone. You don't exist.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I mean, and that's where I get into like my sort of strategy of like, I could go on Twitter and be like, you guys, do you realize that it's unfair? But like, I don't know. I also feel like it's not even like it's necessarily bad to point out the problems in culture like this. But I kind of feel like there's a lot of people doing that, and a lot of people are making that their primary function, their primary purpose. And because there are people that are doing that effectively, it also makes me feel like, you know what, maybe I should focus on making my story, making my characters, making my comic effectively. So that's what I do. I just kind of try to focus instead of, but it's like you want to be aware of the way this stuff works. You want to be aware of the fact that, there's evil, no, maybe evil is a strong word, ruthless establishment powers in corporations, and they're going to do what they do. It's just like the weather. It's just like if you're wandering through an area of the landscape that has cliffs. It's like, just understand, if you walk off the edge of that cliff, you're going to get hurt. And sometimes the cliff edge will come towards you. So it doesn't do anything to get mad about it and shake your fist at the edge of the cliff. Like, it's still gonna hurt you. Just know what you're dealing with and take appropriate precautions.
If we could, I'd like to finish off one question that we began.
Sure.
And just the last part about having the community and, the Twitter, Discord, whatever. Let's say for Discord, for example, you need, or for Twitch even, or streams, it's good to have a few moderators that check in on the community, because, as said, you don't have all the time in the world to manage your community, see if they're up to something bad or not. You have to work on the comic, you have to work on the website, maybe set up shop. There's a lot of stuff already going on in your head and your mind and everything. So what's the process of hiring moderators, if there is any, or if they come by themselves? How would you approach this?
The Discord is a good example of, technically, the Discord does not even really belong to me. Technically, a reader started the Discord. I think it might have been Tari that started the Discord for us on our behalf, and I was just like, oh, thank you very much. We joined, and I guess technically I do have a role in that Discord and some control over it. But honestly, it sort of grew on its own because the readers wanted to have a place to talk to each other, and so they made a place to talk to each other. And I just try to accommodate that. And if there's one thing that I'm actually very bad at, I would say it is keeping up with people, keeping up with talking online, keeping up with chatting online. I chat online virtually not at all. Like, I am so out of it. Usually I have my nose in a drawing. If I'm not drawing, I'll be trying to like catch up on accounting or get some social media or some marketing rolling. But there's always so much to do that I always feel like, oh, well, I got to get this done. I can chat online later. Oh, I got to get this done. I can chat online later. That's actually one reason that I've been really grateful for the streams, is because with the streams, I can be getting illustration done most of the time. And at the same time as I'm getting illustration done, it kind of lets me like talk and engage with people a little bit, kind of see how people are doing and talk with them. So for me, streaming is like the sweet spot where I don't feel like I have to be, on the internet, on social media, in a chat room 24 hours a day, because I would be very bad at that anyways. Instead, I can kind of schedule out at least like one day a week for a few hours where I can just like do some art with people, and then I'm accessible, and if they have questions or whatever, I can hopefully help answer that. So, but when it comes to like the explicit communities, like the Discord community, even the moderators in there, I believe they're all volunteers. They all sort of decided amongst themselves who is a good person, who's good at like taking care of conflict, who's good at kind of keeping things chill. So I'm very fortunate that, again, that whole process has been relatively organic. I didn't really have any big mastermind plans of like, now I will go and bother Potato Fox until he agrees to moderate this Discord,
It's
it just
really,
kind of is the way it came together. So I'm just really I should just be grateful that we have so many good moderators that are doing such a great job.
yeah, it's really nice to know that it happened sort of organically, that it grew without even interaction with you. That you just people wanted to talk about the comic, so they made a place to talk about it, and it grew itself.
Yeah,
It's
and I mean,
interesting.
I think too, like it can be an issue that where things could go wrong in a lot of ways. In like, I guess I'm saying, like, for example, like I know other fandoms can start to get like a reputation, and I think the one I'm thinking of the most is like back in the day, Steven Universe and Tumblr. Like some of those fans would get
Oh,
really belligerent with one another, and I don't know if that's something that could necessarily be solved. Like if a franchise gets big enough, like it's inevitable that if like tons of people are into it, there will be a subset of people that are, obnoxious or just unpleasant and cause problems. That's just sort of, that's just sort of humanity at scale. That's
hmm,
mathematical. So I can't really say like, oh, like our community is vastly superior, but it feels like our community is really great. And I do put a lot of credit to the moderators because I do think that like if you have no moderation at all, or if you have bad moderation and people that are like engaging in like double standards and nepotism and that sort of thing, that can that can really that can really be an issue. Because I don't know if this is true because I don't have that much experience directly dealing with it, but I have this feeling that sometimes a community can kind of take its cues from who it views as a leader, and that could be moderators, or maybe that could even be me, like based on how I conduct myself on social media and stuff. So if you kind of project out the values that you have, the type of behavior that you think is good behavior, and just sort of try to model that behavior and encourage it, I think that can have a positive impact. I do believe it can have a positive impact. And that's probably even better than running around trying to like punish negative behavior. I mean, see, this is why I don't think I even have the right mindset to be a moderator, because I don't like to run around and necessarily be like, oh, you're doing something bad, I'm going to get you. And to a degree, moderators kind of have to stop bad behavior. That's the whole reason they're there. But I guess I'm just saying, like, the right people being moderators and even the right people being more visible in the community, that makes such a huge difference. And so I'm just really fortunate that things have worked out the way that they have with the Dreamkeepers community, because I can't really think of a way it could be better. Like the people contributing are just spectacular. If I was going to say, I think two ingredients help keep a community kind of on the rails. One is to have like just respect for other people's differences, differences of opinion, differences of lifestyle. Like, it doesn't even need to be like something that's like militaristically like, oh, you will respect everything every person says. It's like that's not exactly what I mean. Just just understand it's like you could even tell a person, oh, I think I totally disagree with that, but that's fine, because then you can walk away with your own opinion, and you can totally accept that, oh, the other person has a different opinion. I don't like their opinion, but that's fine. That's why it's not my opinion. It belongs to them, so it's cool. People can have different ideas, and we can all tolerate that because we're adults.
yeah.
And I feel like
Tolerance is
that seems like it's a lot of that's where a lot of the animosity and vitriol in other parts of the internet seem to spring from, is the just like the total lack of any kind of tolerance. And
exactly.
especially when people try to frame someone that disagrees with them, where it's like, oh, if you disagree with me, you are actually not having a difference of opinion in ways to improve the human experience. It's not like you have a different idea of what would make a good result. You don't have different values. No, you're actually some stripe of evil. And like that can be directed from any side. But so that sort of thing, just obviously that is just poison to a community of people that are trying to get along. So that's one key,
Mm.
is to have just basic respect for people's differences of opinions. That doesn't mean you have to respect their opinion or agree with or like their opinion. Just respect that they might have an opinion. You might disagree with it, but that doesn't mean the other person is like an evil or invalid person. It's just a different set of opinions. And I think the other thing that really helps keep a community on the rails is understanding what the point of the community is. Because everyone's got differences of opinion, that's fine, but also at the end of the day, is the purpose of your average webcomic community, is the purpose to get together and argue over who has the best opinions on, like, foreign policy as related to, like, like some pipeline or something.
Yeah.
Like, is that the point of the community? No. And like there probably even are communities where the point is to go and argue about politics and stuff. Like, I don't know, probably Reddit has a place for that, if I was to guess. So if there's like someone where it's like, oh, I really need to argue my opinion desperately, it's like, okay, there's probably a space for that, or at least I would like there to be a space for that online. But every space is not a space for that. And in particular, like a webcomic fandom, if the webcomic itself is, it's a fantasy, it's not exactly based in reality, then the point is not for us to argue with each other about opinions that don't really relate to the webcomic. Like if people want to have conversations, you got to accommodate that to a degree. But ultimately, if people are there to enjoy each other's company and enjoy like this fictional work together, then understanding that that's why people are together, I feel like that helps keep interactions kind of on the rails. So I guess that would be my personal philosophy of what makes a more functional community. Like, and if the purpose of the community is to enjoy some entertainment together as a group, then I think that just makes it a lot easier to have everyone chill a little bit and enjoy their time together.
From this topic, I'd move into the stalkers, because we were talking about bad eggs. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
I would say don't be too afraid if you get popular and then something like that does happen. It might be scary at first. Like, we have had some incidents of stalkers and aggression, and I don't know if I want to get into tons of detail, but you don't want me to get into tons of detail, Liz?
No.
You don't have to if you don't want to. I won't force you.
No, not really.
Yeah, well, I can even talk about, like, for example, when I was a security guard working in Columbus, like, we had someone, like, waiting up for us and, like, driving the car around, honking the horn at me. So sort of like almost like chasing me into my workplace. We had some destruction of property. So I don't know, like sometimes bad things happen. People get very, very angry. And especially if you don't engage with them, which you should not engage with people like that, they get frustrated and they want to make sure that they are felt or heard, or they want to make themselves known in some way. So the first thing I would say is don't necessarily get freaked out or panic. And don't fly off the handle and do anything really extreme or dramatic. All you want to do is just focus on basic personal safety. Try to make sure that you don't put yourself in a situation where you are open to being, attacked or something like that. Try to, if you can, upgrade security to make sure that people can't like hurt you in various ways. And if it gets bad enough, which we have had this get to this level in the past, contact your local law enforcement and work with them in terms of like, because, it is against the law to stalk somebody. And if someone is stalking you, I think one of the first things that you do is you make it very clear to them that you don't want to have any contact with them ever again. Because if a relationship deteriorates to the point where you just don't want to deal with this person, you don't want them in your life, and especially if you think that they might want to hurt you and you think that that's like a cause for fear, you have to tell them, well, I mean, you don't have to, but you can tell them, and you should, if you do this, you should document it. Document yourself telling them, hey, I don't want to ever hear from you again. Don't ever contact me again. Your continued attempts to do X, Y, and Z is making me afraid of you. So just like, please stay out of my life. Thank you. Goodbye forever. So you want to document yourself saying that, because going forward, if they violate your request, then they are doing that with the knowledge that they are incurring fear and with the knowledge that their presence in your life is totally unwelcome. And that, that does have legal ramifications in court. So I would say, just if you do get someone stalking you, don't worry. It's not the end of the world, but stay safe, stay in touch with law enforcement. And yeah, document. That's the huge thing, is document everything. Because if it's the type of personality that will do that sort of thing and try to, inflict harm or inflict emotional stress in real life, sometimes they're not necessarily going to have a limit where they stop. Sometimes they might just keep on going as long as they feel like they can be causing distress or something. So you have to document everything. And then that way, if they do push it too far, you have the documentation to possibly file for a restraining order, or whatever else the people that you're in contact with, whether it's an attorney or law enforcement, if they advise you to take some step, if you have documentation, it's going to be much easier just to prevail upon the law to do what it's supposed to do in that situation.
And I think it's very important to keep a certain wall between yourself and your work. Like, for example, on the internet, we have, thankfully, a lot of anonymity through our nicknames, usernames. We can put in our country to be whatever, right? I can be from Albania, and on another site, I'm from Venezuela or somewhere. So
Yeah.
that could help a lot. And personally, I was at first kind of afraid to... Well, I was thinking like, okay, I'm going to be making a comic, right? Like, I'm going to have to give people my full name, right? And my name is not the most common one, so like, will they find me? Like, what if... And, a lot of these what ifs came up. But over time, I kind of went, well, how many people are going to take time out of the day to possibly travel from, I don't know, like 3 countries over to come to my place and do something? Like, it's gonna cost them so much. The chance of that happening is very small, so I shouldn't be losing sleep over that. But definitely keep some safety guards in case, just in case.
And I would say, like, my personal philosophy on this type of thing is I would not let, like, fear determine any decisions. Like, if you're afraid of, like, what if this happens or what if that happens? Like, the first thing to be reassured by is, like, almost all of the what ifs that you think of in life will never happen. So it can be safer than you think. And on top of that, I think you'll get further in life if you don't necessarily let fear guide your decision making, but instead just understand that you have strength and capability that is largely untapped. And by that, I mean, don't necessarily be afraid of something bad happening, but if something bad happens, just rise to the occasion and get stronger. So, we've had some stressful, terrible things happen periodically, and it's too bad, but if we were sitting around being afraid of those potentialities beforehand, that wouldn't necessarily make them any different. It just would have subtracted happiness from before the event as well as during the event. So really, fear, like, unless you're talking about like in the heat of the moment, like if you're like, oh, here comes a train, I better be afraid, so I get a good adrenaline rush and I dodge the train. It's like, yeah, that can be handy if that situation occurs. But generally speaking, fear it doesn't make you happy. It doesn't give you more energy. It doesn't give you more capacity. So don't make decisions based on fear. Instead, if something does occur, just try to stay calm and focus on making yourself more capable and use it as an opportunity to increase your capacities to deal with difficult things.
Yeah, definitely living in fear is not the way. Keep calm, try to keep a cool head, but when shit hits the fan, like, be ready. I'd agree with that.
Yeah, and even when stuff does hit the fan, if you're like totally overwhelmed by fear, that's gonna make it a lot harder to think on the fly. So
focus, yeah.
Yeah, so unless you're dodging a train, unless there's a train that has like jumped at you that somehow got off the tracks, it got out from where it's supposed to be. Unless you're using that adrenaline rush to dodge a train, generally fear is not helpful. So try to stay chill, get a hold of your emotions, and yes, Liz. Oh, but Liz is pointing out that sometimes, like if you do have some anxiety and stuff, don't be too hard on yourself. That's natural. Sometimes it might take a few days to adjust if you do get some like new unpleasant information.
Yeah, definitely being hard on yourself is not the way. You got it hard enough already. Why make yourself the enemy as well?
Exactly. That's sound advice there.
The next question is about advertising or gaining traction. How would you get your name out there to possible readers? Should you pay for ads? I've heard you talk about this in the past, about going on to even smaller podcasts, just getting those 2-3 people and slowly building up from there? How would you approach getting your name out there, getting your comic out there?
I would actually say I don't honestly know how exactly I would approach it now, even because the landscape is always shifting so much. So the stuff I was trying when I first started out, maybe it would be effective now, or maybe it wouldn't. Maybe the landscape is so different. Somebody could do the exact same stuff I did, and it would just have a totally different effect. And even the content itself can be. Some content might have tactics that work very well for it, whereas other tactics might just be total flops. So I guess I can't really... That is one of the most difficult things, and I think this is one of the things that creators underestimate it. A lot of creators want to sit there and they want to make something that is so great that it must inevitably become successful. And unfortunately, that is not how it works. Unfortunately, you can make content that is absolutely spectacular, but if you don't have some skill in advertising, then no one's going to know about it. No one's going to read it. So it effectively does not matter how spectacular it is. So a lot of times creators focus, and I think they focus correctly, on trying to make fantastic content, trying to make something that is as compelling and skillful and engaging and enthralling as they can. But you've got to try and hone a totally different skill. There's almost no overlap between the skill of making some great content versus advertising and getting stuff out there and marketing effectively. So I've just been basically throwing everything I could at the wall for 15 years and just trying one thing after another, after another, after another. And the thing is, for me, it has always felt like I will try my best to think of something real smart and captivating and cost effective, and I'll do it, and then the result will be it almost feels like nothing changes, and it's like it barely works, or sometimes it feels like there's literally no impact. So, and that can be really demoralizing, which is why the most important thing is, well, you better love what you're doing, because if you're really attached to oh, I can't believe that advertising thing didn't work, if that was the most important part of the process, then you're just going to get discouraged. But if you get to go home and draw a comic and you still love doing that, then that'll keep you going. So stuff we've done over the past 15 years, I'll just list off some of the stuff we've done, and then we can talk about any more detail if you want.
If I may, before we even start, I just had the bathroom idea. I don't know, sometimes the best ideas come to you when your pants are down. When it comes to advertising, you said, throwing stuff at the wall, seeing what sticks. For some readers, example for me, I live in a European country in Middle Europe, right? A Slavic one, so we have the Slavic accent and everything.
Cool.
But one sort of a untapped market that I may have over somebody, let's say, living in America is I can try releasing my comic. Let's say I have 2 volumes or 2 chapters on the net, and I can try releasing it in my what do you call it? In my native language, right?
Yeah.
Because it might not stick, right? Maybe the readers here won't be interested in a sci-fi space adventure, but hey, it's possible readers, and if they catch on, rewriting a few lines of text every day into a different language that I know very well shouldn't be that big of a problem, and it might bring in a lot of people. So it's definitely something to try out.
Totally. I would say that seems like the sort of thing where it's like a low cost and a high potential result. And that's exactly the type of advertising thing that you should sort of be having your radar dish out for. Look for something that is not going to have a huge cost, but it could have a potentially decent upside. And if you have a market where there's not that many comics in your native language, there's less competition there's less stuff for people to read. There might be people where that's just what they're looking for.
I haven't seen or even looked at the market, but from what I've been just passively observing, the market is next to nothing. So that might be a big place to try and look.
Yeah, it'll be unpredictable because it's it's next to nothing, so that means that no one there is really used to reading comics.
Yeah, there's no foundation, but
There's no foundation, but that's just because the right thing hasn't been presented to them. So you might have to figure out, okay, so even if you cross the language barrier, then the next thing to figure out is how do I make these people know that this is an option for them, because they're not just going to telepathically know.
Yeah.
But but still, that's a fun thing to try. I'm just going to go down the laundry list of stuff we have done over the years.
Go ahead.
So people get an impression of like, I'm not an expert in any one of these. We just kept on trying stuff. We put our books in local indie bookshops. We made teaser DVDs for the series. I think even before we had a book out, we had DVDs of like video people could watch. I've done presentations for free at libraries. I've done free presentations at schools. I've done panels at conventions. We've given away bookmarks, postcards, business cards. We've even given away, one of the things we do a lot at conventions now is we will give away posters. In fact, one year we went to Anime Central, and I knew I didn't have any kind of a large customer base there because we had almost never been there. So I went with 1,000 posters to give away, and attached to every poster was a rubber band with a postcard for our comics. So we had just a convention where we were aggressively giving away hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of free posters, literally 1,000 poster giveaway. In the golden era of webcomics, back when link exchanges were a thing, we did as many link exchanges with other webcomics as we could. That's kind of died out with the advent of social media. We'd put banner ads up. Oh, go ahead.
I have no idea what that is. Is it just basically like, hey, here's my comic, hey, here's your comic, let's advertise it on our comic websites?
Basically? Yeah, like circa like 2007, around there, 2008, people would all have their own comic on their own website, because that's what you had to have back then. It's before social media really took off. So you had your own website, and then you would talk to other people and be like, hey, I have a links page on my website. If I link to your webcomic, will you link on your links page to my webcomic? And so everybody would just go around and put up little banners on their links page for each other's comics, and it was a really good way to cross-pollinate. I know we used to have, like, up until the most recent iteration of the website, I think I still had that like links page with tons and tons of links on there. And the last time I was on there, I realized like half of these websites don't even exist anymore. Most of them just vanished. But so we would do a lot of link exchanges back in the day. We put banner ads up. We made tons of banner ads, animating like GIF banner ads, JPEG banner ads, all sorts of banner ads on Project Wonderful. And we put banner ads and like square ads, different formats on Google, Facebook, Twitter. So we did definitely do extensive advertising, as much as we could afford at least. And this is why I was working as a security guard the whole time I was trying to get Dreamkeepers started, because if we did sell any books or go to conventions or make any money with Dreamkeepers, like I didn't take any of that money for me personally. Like it all just went straight back into Vivid Publishing and straight back into trying to promote Dreamkeepers and trying to keep snowballing that audience. So we just, like everything we could possibly put into it, everything we could possibly put into growing our readership, we put it in there. But yeah, email, newsletter promotion. If we saw piracy happening, we would completely allow it to happen because that was more promotion. Guesting on as many podcasts as I could, multiple podcasts. We've done like covers for magazines. I think Furzine, we did like a cover for them, and we had a 10-page comic that we made for them for free to have it featured in there, sort of promoting Dreamkeepers. We started the annual Halloween fan art contest because that way we can have readers helping us promote the series by putting more Dreamkeepers art out into the world. We've done commissions for people. I've written articles for news websites, articles on like comic culture and furry culture, and even culminating with making fully animated commercials. Like I'm sure most people in our readership, we've probably seen the 15-second fully animated custom spot. In addition, I've done some animation for like the Skirmish campaign and other little bits of animation here and there. So even going so far as to do traditional frame-by-frame animation, even the frame-by-frame animation we did for the video game, and then putting that like engine test demo out there for free so people could hopefully have fun with that. And so, but yeah, that is like sort of an overview of all the things I can remember off the top of my head that we have done for marketing and advertising. And it takes absolutely a lot of a lot of effort to get attention on anything. And actually, I don't mean to be discouraging, but I think it's getting harder. Like with the internet, with social media, it has made attention spans get shorter and shorter, and the competition for attention is intense. It's more intense now than it's probably ever been, and especially like even like you're not even really competing with other comic artists. Like I don't think it's like a zero-sum thing where, oh, like there's only so many good webcomics out there, and this comic has taken up all of my. Like no, I think if you talk to readers really love good comics, and if there's more good comics for them to read, they're even happier. What we're really competing with is, and I don't even think it's necessarily even like Disney and other mainstream stuff, because Disney and other mainstream entertainment, they have kind of locked themselves out of doing so much in terms of story just because of their content restrictions. What we're really competing with in terms of mass attention, I think, is just like the fear porn of news. News kind of like locks people's attention into like, oh, here's the top 10 reasons you're going to die today. And then people just like get glued to their social media feed and then like, get locked into like screaming at other people over like, don't you understand the top 10 reasons I'm going to die today? And if you don't agree with the establishment, they're all going to come true, you bastard. So
yeah, we're dealing with quite the rush when it comes to internet posts, all sorts of things being released by the media, politics being more covered than ever, and the fact that the attention spans are getting shorter. And I agree with that. It could make building a fan base a lot harder than it would have been, let's say, 5-10 years ago. Yeah. But at the same time, I'd say that though it may be harder to grow and your growth may be smaller, I'd say that it's actually better right now, because if you attract someone, if somebody finds a way to you, they have a higher chance of being someone who'll stick around longer, who'll interact with you a lot more, and just being, the type of person you are, because you mostly attract the type of readers that you yourself are.
Yeah, and that's another point too. Is like there's like ironically with the difficulty in getting people's attention these days, I think that like authentic, original, good stories, I feel like that sort of thing is more important than ever before. Because especially with the way the news is turning people against each other deliberately, people need to have like some sort of escape. They need to have something that connects them with something that is deeper, something that is meaningful, something that gives them context and sort of like makes them feel something universal in common with their fellow man. So I think that as the media gets more and more ramped up with all this stuff, I think that ironically it's more difficult to get attention on good entertainment, but I think good entertainment is more key to people's well-being than it's been for a long time, I would say.
Yeah, because, the media, it's mostly focusing on separation. And what the comics do, we have a community. They connect us together. They're the exact opposite of what the media do.
Yeah. And in fact, I think a lot of times that's why sometimes people that are in this more establishment sphere of media, news, even entertainment, a lot of times they will try to make sure that their voices are the dominant voices because they have a vested interest in making sure that people stay kind of separated and controlled, and that they don't actually come together in a positive way, which is too bad. But again, that's why it's like I think that's why it's all the more important that we stick with it and make things that people can really get genuine value and genuine enjoyment out of, and just keep on trying to do our part to make it available to them. And you are right, like when people do find you in this kind of environment, when the people that understand that maybe they could use a good story, maybe they could use a good break from all this stuff, when those people find you and start enjoying your work, you can forge something that's really special and really durable. And so, and it happens one reader at a time. I think that's the one takeaway from all of my advertising and all of my I'll give away 1,000 posters. I'll do a commercial. I'll animate like a 15-second fully animated commercial spot and then promote it on YouTube. Like all of that, the only solid lesson that I can get as a takeaway from that is that every comic, everything you do, growth is always going to be one reader at a time. Even if it's like a handful of readers, it's still one reader experiencing your story that likes it and they want more of it. And It's just a, don't dismiss something. Like if you're like invited on a podcast and it's like, oh, this is a little podcast, it only has an audience of 12 people. It's like, well, that might be like, in that 12 people there might be one or two people that really get what you're doing. And I mean, I'm not sure if there's really a price tag you can put on that. I would say too, there's different types of attentional value. Like you can put something out there, and this is kind of how social media works, where you can put something out there that's very accessible. I think a good example, like for example, a post that we put out that's doing probably more popular than our typical posts. I put out like a cool illustration of Hakuzo's characters battling. It's a commission that we recently did, and then I put like, oh, getting ready for in-laws, be like, because it's like in-laws battle, haha. It's just like a nice bite-sized little. It's like a 1 second emotion. It's like a fun little one. Yeah.
Yeah, something approachable by the common man and woman user.
Yeah. So, and that's kind of the optimal attention span for social media is a 1 second emotion. So if you can put something out there where people, and that's not to diminish it, if people can look at it and get 1 second of, huh, oh yeah, that's cool, or huh, oh I get that makes me chuckle, or oh, that's kind of sexy. If you can put something out there on social media, it's optimized for a 1 second emotion, and that's the stuff that's going to spread better. But I don't think that, if you get like, let's say you get like hundreds or thousands of people that get like a 1 second emotion out of something, is that more valuable? Are those hundreds or thousands of people, is that more valuable than if you deliver a book, like a story, to one person who actually gets pulled into it and they understand all the depth and the nuance and the detail and they have a deeper experience? I would say that like there's a shallow experience and then there's deeper experience. And if you can deliver deeper experience to people, it's really hard to quantify that value. We can quantify shallow experience easy. It's like, oh, look, I got, 100 likes. Woo. And again, that's not a bad thing. It's like, cool, 100 people got a little kick out of that. That's pretty cool. But we don't really quantify deeper experience as easily. But I think that the deeper experience is even more important to us in some ways.
I agree with that. Because, well, it depends on the author, right? One person may prefer just having those numbers, while, for me, example, having 1,000 people be like, oh yeah, I read your story, pretty cool, bye. That would be like, okay, nice. But if one guy comes to me and he's like, man, like, all that stuff you did, like, it made me change, like, it inspired me, and so my heart would fucking explode from that. Sorry for the profanity, if you're okay with that.
It's okay, I'm fine with it.
Yeah. So my heart would go crazy from that. And personally, I would value that 1,000 times more than even 1 million people going like, yeah, that's cool. Yeah,
exactly. And so I think that we sort of have the same mindset on that, and that's why I think attentional, the attentional depth, I think for us that would probably carry higher value than a high volume of attentional shallowness.
Yeah, it's always nice when you take your time. Like, for example, I was just scrolling down Twitter, as I do from time to time, and I stopped on a piece of art, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I was about to move on, but I was like, no, pay more attention. Like, don't do the exact same thing you don't like with people just scrolling and scrolling. Just take your time, look at the details and everything. And I looked at the art. I saw there's like boots in the bag. They're really muddy, and there's a thrown like bag of groceries just casually thrown on the ground. And so I told the artist, like, oh, that's really cool. That the image can tell a lot about the personality of the character. Yeah. And they were extremely excited from that. Like, oh my god, somebody actually pays attention to these details. They were so happy, and that made me happy. And the entire experience was great. So yeah, that's something I would aim for.
Yeah, man, that's awesome, and that's really nice too. Is like when you can like not just like put things out there for other people to appreciate, but when you can see something that you're like, oh, I really like that. Articulating appreciation, like I think that's part of like seeing more of that type of thing too. Like, because if artists are trying their best to put stuff out there and put all this like depth and meaning into it, and then they never get any positive feedback, we might see less artists doing that, which is unfortunate. So it's always a good reminder to try and stop. And if you see something you really like, maybe try to let the person know, hey, I like this, and here's why.
And you never know how much you could change somebody's day by just saying, "Hey, this is like actually really cool."
I think it's a good habit to get into, and I'm not even trying to lecture you. I'm even trying to like just remind myself of this
No
dynamic,
problem.
because it also just kind of makes life a little more enjoyable when you're on the lookout for things that you like.
Yeah, I
Because it's
agree with that.
yeah,
I've been trying, trying to learn as life goes on. You learn a lot of stuff, and the past few years I've been focusing more on certain teachings from Buddhists and these monks and people who just lived life and know a bit more than I do. And a lot of it is that, like, take your time, don't rush through the day. Even something as mundane as eating food, I've tried to actually like stop thinking, stop watching TV or my computer, just focus on the food, and I found myself enjoying the food a lot more. I can um, not decompose, decompile the different flavors in the food, and I've even picked up cooking, and that has even more enhanced the details in the food, and it's just really nice to apply these not only in art but in life.
yeah, definitely.
About starting your comic, I think you started page by page, but I'm not sure because it was before I even took interest in Dreamkeepers. But would you recommend people start page by page or try to, let's say, build up a few pages or maybe even like a first introductory shorter chapter to sort of create something that people can see, go watch, and they don't immediately hit a wall of, oh, there's no more, they might lose interest, with that. But if you have a bit of a intro or prologue, they have something to sink their teeth in to get them interested. What would you recommend, and what type of starting out you go through, and how did that turn out?
That's a good question. I'll say like how we sort of started out, and we started out by making all of Volume One, and so there was none of it was available to read online anywhere. In fact,
Hmm.
we originally made all Volume One, and then it was a print only release, and we did not have it on the website. We just had like teaser pages, and we were like, "Hey, here's teaser pages. Please buy Volume One over here." And that worked pretty good for a while, actually. And then eventually we noticed that there was people that were kind of like pirating Volume One on these different image boards, and I did. I guess I was supposed to be like, "Oh, pirates, grr!" But I was like, "Hey, cool. They're enjoying it more. I like that people are enjoying it and reading it more." And so we just sort of like, me and Liz talked about it, and we're like, well, you know what? If they're just going to have it online for free, maybe we should just have it online for free, and then they can read it on our website instead. Yeah, Liz? Oh yeah, I forgot. There was actually one pirate that was having some trouble getting a hold of quality images, so we sort of were like, "Hey, in case you were trying to get a hold of images that were at a higher quality, we could provide a copy of that so you could scan it a little bit." So we really low key kind of encouraged the piracy. Maybe not that low key.
I mean, you saw an opportunity and you took it.
Well, I mean, it was hard to be. I know some people would get really mad about it and stuff, but it was like people that like what we do, and they wanted to share it. Like
I mean,
that's like free marketing. That's like people enjoying our work. So it just seems like this. It felt like I should be doing more to encourage it than to try to like put a stop to it.
I mean, piracy can be controversial, but usually the reason people pirate something is either they don't have the money, or they want to see it without paying first, and they're interested in it, or they're just interested in it. So unless you're some kind of big corp where you're losing thousands of money on, let's say, a new game you just released,
Yeah,
piracy, I'd say, could actually work to your benefit quite a bit.
yeah, and my personal feeling too is that if people really want a physical copy of something, or if they really want even like a digital copy of something, then they'll buy it. And if they pirated it at first, I don't think that really changes whether or not they want to whether or not they want to own a copy of it. I think the only thing
Yeah.
it might do is potentially make more people that want to own a copy of it, because like you said, they don't know if they like it or not. They check it out, and then if they like it, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, the reason, for example, the games industry was still is experiencing such a big spike in piracy is demos basically don't exist. There are open betas and stuff like that, but they are mostly limited in time. Back in the day, you had all sorts of demo discs. You could try out what the game was before you bought it.
Yeah.
And nowadays, it's just, hey, you want the newest, biggest shooter, like high quality graphics and everything? $60 or nothing. So, like, what am I gonna do? I'm a student. I don't have $60 in a month. So I'm just gonna pirate the game, see if I like it, and if I do, hey, maybe I will save up for it or buy it on sale or something.
Yeah.
And the exact same thing goes with right now. I don't pirate games too much because if there's a game I really like and I know that I'll like it, I hold off. I try to save money, and when an opportunity arises, or I just have some extra cash on my person, then I'd rather just buy it later than to pirate it, because right now, as a upcoming creator, the supporting of other creators has sort of like entered my mind, and I focus on that a lot more than I used to when I was younger.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I do think there's probably like an age component to it too.
Oh, sure.
So
I mean, you can expect kids or even teens, especially students paying off loans and everything, to buy all the products you are releasing. That's just impossible.
Yeah. So that's kind of like talking about how I think in our past piracy actually kind of worked for us. And but on the question of, is it better to release a comic on a weekly basis or to have a whole bunch kind of done first and then launch it?
Yeah.
I would say it kind of depends on the style of story to a degree, because there's pros and cons for each approach. I know back in Liz? Liz is saying she would do both, have a big chunk at the beginning and then a single page release. And I know back in the webcomic days, everybody would kind of, like back in the webcomic days, weekly updates were sort of king. So if you had weekly updates, even if the comic was really bad, people really liked having something that they recognized that they could come back to every week. That's not really the case anymore with social media, because people were essentially getting their dopamine hits from comics, like 2003, 2008, 2007, that golden age of webcomics. People were getting their sort of like little dopamine hit from their comic updates. As soon as social media came along, they could get much more intense, much more consistent dopamine hits from, getting into arguments. So that sort of made the webcomic format not such a big deal. Back in the day, updating every single week, like that was it. That was the king. If you could be updating every week or even multiple times a week or even daily, like updating frequency was very, very critical. That might still be the case for some styles of comic now, but generally speaking, it's not as much of an automatic win strategy as it was like a decade ago.
Oh yeah, well, one thing I actually kind of completely forgot about, we're talking about having a webcomic, and I just like to sort of say it out loud so we have it on record that we're mostly talking about story-focused, either multiple chapter comics or stuff like that, not weekly comics or the stuff that you mostly see on Twitter where it's like weekly or every now and then comic that is just like its own little bubble, and the next thing from that offer is something completely different. Right now, this advice can apply to many things, but when it comes to the comics we're discussing, I am focusing on the story-focused, like long-term, multiple chapter type of comic.
Okay, that's actually very good to know, because I would say too, like release planning, it really depends largely on what type of comic it is. So
yeah, that too.
So like the Twitter comics, it might tend more towards like single panel gags or like a political humor comic or a political not humor comic more often. So that sort of stuff, it might just be more like just like put them out when they go out. Maybe like frequent updates. It's more of like a social media style.
Yeah.
But for story-based comics, I'm even seeing some comics now go with a totally new approach, which I think is going to be relatively viable. Which is like Reagan Lodge is creating Wyatt, which is the
Yeah,
graphic novel.
I've been following that for quite a while, and I plan to ask him if he would like to come on as well, because
Yeah,
I'm a
like
big fan of his work.
he would be a great guest. And like I've noticed the style that he's doing with Wyatt is he's actually not putting any content out online. Well, he's putting content out, but he's not putting any like comic
Yeah, there's no
pages or
comic.
story. Like
Yeah,
he's like not updating pages on his website. So he's just kind of consistently streaming and then showing people like concept samples and progress updates. And so he's kind of showing them like tidbits and concept and teaser. And then when the comic is ready, like when the book is done, I think he's just going to crowdfund it. And I think that because of the following he's built up, I think that that's going to be a really successful model for him. And that's a new
yeah,
model that, like in the webcomic days, like nobody would have thought of that. Like, what? How can you possibly build an audience if you're not putting updates out online? There's no way. And it's like I think people's audiences largely are built now on their online footprint as a person. And Reagan's kind of a good example of that. And I think his strategy is going to work really well. I think Elson Wong, Dark Speeds, is doing that with his comic Eden Spell, and it looks like it's going to be working for him too. So that is a new approach, which is to basically not put any comic pages online, and instead just post like teasers and samples and updates and progress, and then build up an audience of people that like what they see, so that when the book is ready for a launch, there they are.
yeah.
And
It's a really unique approach that when I first found Regan, for example, I was like, oh my god, this looks amazing. Like, okay, let's go to his website. And I searched for like half an hour and was like, where's the comic? and then I like realized, wait, there's no comic. He's just slowly releasing it. And I gotta say, the art itself, like the setting, his style is so beautiful. The places that he's creating are so captivating that they by themselves are enough to sell me on the entire comic. Like, I will most likely buy the book when I have the money for it.
Mhm. Excuse me. And I've had personally, I feel the same. Like I can see the amount of care he's putting into it. I can see the professionalism and the sharpness of the design work, and just seeing how basically how good it is. Like the goodness of it has me sold, and I'm just like, you know what? It's so good in terms of like the art and the concept stuff around it looks so cool. And I feel like I've got enough of a sensibility of his taste and his personality from his streams that I just sort of trust. It looks so good that I think the story is going to be good too, and we'll find out. And I bet it will be. Um, so that is an approach that is relatively novel, which is don't release any of it online, at least not off the bat. Just build up interest, and I think that is though that functional approach is predicated on building a successful online following. So, like, if there was somebody that did not have any streaming presence, they did not have any connections, no people that they talked to, they didn't know anybody. If they tried that approach, they would probably just be sort of like a voice in the wilderness. And even if their stuff was very good, nobody would ever know about it, and their launch probably wouldn't work. So, I really like this technique that Reagan is doing, but it's not like a one size fits all. So I don't
Oh,
think
yeah,
that
of course.
like anybody could just walk in and have that same level of result and interest. So that's just like a cautionary note, I guess. No,
Yeah, even me, myself, his approach, for him, perfect. But, let's say for me, I was thinking of my comic as this story. The main thing I want to do is just tell a story, and if anybody wants to listen, I'll be glad, right?
yeah,
So I'm not really focusing on books right now. That's the whole headache I'll just cover later when people are like, "Where's the books? We want books." Like, okay, then I'll focus on that later. Right now, for me personally, I just want to create a place where they can find the comic for free for everyone, everything just there. And for me personally, I think having this prologue to let people experience a little bit of the comic and get hooked on it is just the right way. But of course, depends on the comic, depends on the person. There's a lot of variables.
yeah. And I think the releasing it online for free, I think that's also a good approach. Like for example, if Reagan was like also releasing his pages free on his website as he goes, I don't think that would necessarily diminish interest in the book. In fact, who knows? Maybe it would increase it. Maybe it would diminish it. It's hard to predict this stuff. Like, you never really know until you actually run a campaign and see what people are actually willing to put their value into. But I would say another consideration, just aside from audience growth and marketing and all that stuff, one consideration is how will a basic release schedule affect the content itself? And I would say that is something to definitely keep a close eye on, because I've noticed that if people do a weekly webcomic or something, there's often a very major risk that they will sort of drop into a mindset of writing like the story, just like it's structured like page to page to page. Like every page has sort of like, here's what happens and here's a cliffhanger. Here's what happens and here's a cliffhanger. And I mean, sometimes even in books, it's not necessarily bad to have a little bit of like suspense from page to page, of course. But if someone is so used to like the rhythm of a webcomic, the rhythm of every week, the rhythm of an audience having questions one week that they want resolved the next week, that can very drastically affect the pacing of the whole piece of work. If you take one of those types of comics and you try to like go on an archive binge and read the whole comic, or sit down with it in a book and read that book, a lot of times the pacing is just so monotonous. It's just like, boom, 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 boom. And so you lose a lot of the pacing that you need to have within a book that's like a longer form work. Like, you need areas of intense action, areas where things relax. There needs to be some pages where...
There needs to be a balance, yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that is one of the potential risks of very methodical weekly updates. One of the potential benefits, although this was a greater benefit, again, like 2005, 2006, it might still be a benefit now, but that is audience retention and getting people interested in it and getting people hooked on it. So that's a potential benefit of a regular update schedule. But again, a potential downside is it can be easy, especially if there isn't a pre-planned script or a pre-planned outline. It can be very easy to drop into just a week by week by week by week pacing that sort of flattens out the feel of the reading experience.
Yeah, personally, I've been thinking about the story for quite a while now, because a few years ago, I was deciding like, okay, I have this story, I want to tell it, what medium am I going to do it in? I decided art, okay. I had a mental breakdown, I had a small episode, and
Sure.
I started learning art. And since I couldn't just, start doing it, a lot of people actually tell you like, hey, you have this idea, like do it right now, just go do it because you'll fizzle out or something. I personally don't agree with that. Like, I knew if I started the comic back then, it would be dog shit from both the story and the art. The story, I didn't know it was dog shit back then, but as I grew older and as I, went over and over and over the story in my head, I slowly realized, hey, there's not many things going on. And as I grew up, I started understanding how writing stories works, what character arcs are, what interests people, what makes people connect with characters.
Yeah.
And so much has changed over the 5 to 6 years I've had the initial idea of the comic in my head. I can't imagine how the comic would go down if I had just started it at that time and right there. Like, I personally, thankfully, have a timeline of the comic. I have major ideas of what should happen, but I like to keep the details and the in-betweens still open so that I can have some fun creating new things during making the comic, that it's not just, okay, this happens now and this happens, so I'm bored to death and there's no creativity anymore, it's just drawing. But keeping those key points in there. And one thing I want to do to sort of not lose my track when doing the weekly updates is every chapter I would like to have split up. I have sorry, my tongue is twisting. The idea is I would either have a whiteboard or just a digital whiteboard where I would lay out key points of the story, like this happens, then this happens, and then in between those I would insert as many or as little pages that would serve as transitions, right? Of course, interesting things may happen in those transitions, but by the end, right, after going over this storyboard, I would have a good framework of what happens at what page, how that resolves either the next page or a few pages later, so that I don't have this exact problem that you were talking about, that I start making things really focus on that weekly basis, that like 1 week happens this and another this, and then another reader comes by, has everything at his fingertips, and he's just like boom boom, and he gets overwhelmed and doesn't care anymore.
Yeah. So yeah, it sounds like you've got like a good approach, and I would say like you have a sensibility of what you want to do and why you want to do it. So that's a good place to be, because you can get advice from people, and it's really helpful when you understand why some advice is good and when you understand why some advice might not apply to you. Because, people can give all kinds of advice based on their experience, but it doesn't mean that it's going to be definitely the right direction for you to go.
Yeah, everyone's different.
Yeah.
Approaching turning your webcomic into a physical book, what part do publishers play? And, when I think, okay, I have a comic, like I have several chapters that would make for a nice, like, let's say, first release. I want to put them in a book and release it to people. What do I do? Because my mind is completely blank.
I can just kind of walk through the path that we took and what we did. And there's,
Sure.
More options emerging, but this is at least a couple of basic ones. When I was fresh out of college and I had volume 1 and I finally finished it, or actually even before I finished it, plan 1 was like, oh, we'll get submitted to a publisher, and we'll find a publisher, and then our book will be published, and it'll be a published book. So we did that, and the process for doing that is you identify some publishers that you would ideally like to be published with, and then you look at their submission guidelines and you send in a submission and you hope that you hear back from them. And we did hear back from one, and fortunately they accepted us. And then the next thing you do is, when you get accepted by a publisher, or when they send you the contract to sign, is you read the contract very carefully, because you don't necessarily want to agree to it if they are taking a whole ton of the revenue, or if they're taking all of your rights away.
Yeah, very important. Always read the contract very well.
Read the contract, and also make sure that you don't just read it. Make sure that you totally understand with clarity whatever they're saying. Because, I don't know, there's, of course, if you want stories, there's all sorts of nightmare stories out there of people who signed the wrong contract and then their project got taken away from them or put into limbo forever, or any number of things. And so that's kind of, fortunately, we didn't have the contract that rigid, because that's kind of what was going to happen with Dreamkeepers. Was the publisher was like, okay, cool, we'll release this in the summer, and I was like, all right, cool. And then later on he called back and he was like, hey, there's some swears in here, and this book is going to be for little kids, right? So remove the swears from Dreamkeepers Volume 1. And I was like, well, I don't like that. It's not really supposed to be for kids, okay. And then later on, he was like, okay, and we're also going to push this back to not this summer, but the summer after this summer. And at that point, I was so impatient, because we had gone to some conventions and we'd showed some sample pages around, and people were into it. People signed up to our newsletter, and they were looking forward to the book release. And so I was like, I want people to be able to read my book. I don't want to wait a whole another year, darn it. And at that point, I heard the phrase print on demand. And as soon as I heard the phrase print on demand, I was like, what's this? Because I had, of course, to get things ready for the publisher, I had all the files ready to print, and we had done all the print formatting, so it was ready to rock. And so I was like, wait, print on demand means I can just give these files I made to some print on demand company, and then I give them money, and then they give me a pile of books. What do I need this publisher guy for? I can get books without him.
Yeah,
so
that's really interesting, because for me, I didn't know there was such a thing. This just blew my mind.
Yeah, so that's the exact same way I felt. I was like, print on demand, this is amazing. And the reason that print on demand is different from other types of printing, this will be just a quick lesson on printing. There are two basic types of printing: print on demand and offset printing. Now, print on demand, that is where if you're a new creator and if you don't have like a huge audience or whatever, I would say if you want to publish your own stuff yourself and keep total control, print on demand is a great way to start. Let me get some water briefly.
No problem.
Thank you. And the really nice thing about print on demand is usually there's no order minimum, which means let's say you have one customer and you have that's it. You just have one customer. You can go to a print on demand company and be like, I would like to buy one book. Boom. You can buy one copy of your book. One copy of your book is printed and you can deliver to that customer. So that's
nice.
So that's really nice. It means you don't have to worry about breaking the bank on some massive investment in a zillion books, Now the downside, of course, of print on demand is the cost per unit is pretty high. So if you're printing off a graphic novel and maybe that graphic novel's price point is $20, it might cost $18 just to print it. So it's very, very difficult to get profit from print-on-demand sales.
Yeah.
Liz is saying, but if it's for your grandma, she'll be really happy. And yeah, and even so print-on-demand is what we did for years and years with Dreamkeepers. In fact, I think we did print-on-demand up until Volume 3 is the first book that we had. And for years, I would just sell the print-on-demand books to customers, and I could only afford a little batch at a time. But, so that's what we did. We just printed off a little bit at a time. Yeah, so print on demand is a very, very cost-effective way to get started out. I would recommend it, especially if you don't know how many readers you have, you don't know how many books you're going to sell. Just get print off 5 books, print off 3 books, print on demand, and then if you need more, you can just print off some more of them. So it's very...
You could also, and you could use it to test out the quality. If I don't know how the conversion from, let's say, an RGB color scale on computers would translate to a comic being printed in CMYK.
Yeah.
So you don't. I personally don't have a lot of experience with that, but I could just go hey, I would like you to print me this book. Here's $20, and I can hold the copy of okay, this is what the reader will get. On this page, the colors I used are completely fucked up due to the conversion. So, hey, let's fix that, right? And there's a nice way to test the waters.
Yep, and another thing that it can be very nice for is even if you wanted to have a physical copy to spell check, because trust me, when you're looking at something on a computer screen, for some reason typos have a cloaking device, I swear. And as soon as it's printed on paper, those typos will just stand up and punch you in the face. They're so obvious.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's print on demand. And then the other type of printing is offset printing. And offset printing is basically where they have a machine that is the size of a factory, right? So this thing is massive. It's in some warehouse somewhere. And just getting the machine set up and getting it calibrated and putting in the printing plates for the different pages, most of the cost in offset printing is setting up the machine. It's because there's so many pieces to get ready. So the setup cost is X. It's maybe a few $1,000. It's pretty high. But once the machine is set up, that thing will just be and it'll print off books like none other. And so they can just let that thing run. And basically at that point, once the setup cost is covered, the cost per unit of the books goes way, way down. So if you do have the ability to have a few hundred customers, or if your things are going really well, 1,000 customers or so, at that point, you can do some offset printing. And if you print off 1,000 books, the cost per unit from the books is going to go from print on demand, I don't know, $18 a book, $15 a book. If you do offset printing, the cost per book could go down to $6, $5, depending on the book, maybe even $3. And the more books you print, it's you already are paying for the setup costs. So the additional books don't cost that much. If you wanted to print off instead of 1,000, 2,000, the cost difference isn't as big as you would think. It's not it costs
to hell with it.
Yeah, it doesn't cost twice as much to print off 2,000. It costs maybe 120% as much. So So that's where if you're doing offset printing, you can suddenly get access to a lot of books, and the cost per unit is it can actually make it viable to sell books and have profit.
So yeah, print on demand is your friend in the beginning, and if you pick up on numbers, offset printing.
Yeah, and the nice thing too is based on the printing company you're going with, a lot of times they're going to be able to give you detailed information on what you need for setup. Like one of the best, in my opinion, print-on-demand companies for comics is Kablam. And so we do a lot of our print-on-demand through them, and they've got like everything you really need. They've got page templates. They tell you what type of files they want, and so if you had like even when you're doing stuff like this, if you're like, oh, how do I do X, Y, and Z? Odds are the company you're working with, they want you to be able to submit files that are convenient for them to use. So they have every incentive to just make sure that you know what you're doing and help you out with that process.
You said something about their preferred like page dimensions. Could there be a possible problem that like if I choose weird dimensions to make my comic in, that they'll like? Can I run into a sort of a roadblock with print on demand that they're like, hey, we can't print this template you have here, or would they be like, okay, this is like a very weird template you have here, but we'll print it. You just have to pay extra because it's not something we do regularly.
That depends entirely on the company, and it could be a problem. Like I know with Kablam printing, for example, they have that classic comic size and shape, which is 6.675 by 9.25. So that's classic standard issue comic size, and they can print that off all day long. But if you want to print off like a different size, I don't think they can do that. So with offset printing, of course, offset printing, they basically set the machine up to whatever they want to set it up to, and they can print pretty much whatever you ask them to with an offset print run. But with print on demand, there might be other companies that can do different sizes, but it's going to be a little more of a hunt to find a company that can do like a custom size, and it could potentially affect the price as well. But I would also say it might be worth looking around a little bit to printers before you completely settle on a format for your comic. Because like let's say you've got a format where you're feeling it, like you are feeling that wide format, it's calling out to you. If you can find a printer that would be able to accommodate that, then it might change the whole course of like how you lay your comic out, and it might be something that's worthwhile for you to look at. In fact, we've had a shift even in Dreamkeepers, because with Dreamkeepers, we put so much into the background and the detail and all of that art that I always kind of wanted it to be like a little more like, I don't know, expansive. And, because we were doing print on demand, I was like, well, standard comic size, that's good enough for most comics. We'll just go with that. But as we've been growing and developing, and as we have like the ability to do offset printing more attainably now, I kind of have started thinking like, well, now that I can kind of do offset printing, I could do anything I want for the series. Do I want to potentially change the format? And I actually decided to go for it. So Volume 5 is technically the first Dreamkeepers graphic novel in the series that is 8.5 by 11 format instead of the smaller standard comic size.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how that turns out.
I've got they sent me 2 copies of it early because I guess I'm the customer, so they sent me these copies early from the freight shipment. And I love the bigger size. It feels so much more like immersive, and they're in hardcover, which I think accentuates that. I don't know. I don't want to become like a format snob or something, but I will say with Dreamkeepers, I'm glad that I decided to spring for a larger format, and I think it's definitely the home format for the series.
Oh yeah, preparing for the long term, saving up money and certain problems that could cost you and possibly be quite devastating on the financial side, to the point where you might have to pull your comic for a while.
Yeah, I can actually talk a little bit about that from personal experience, I guess. Just because when we started out, Liz, you're looking at me. What's up? Sexy Grigori? What about Sexy Grigori? Yes, I will draw Sexy Grigori while I talk about my personal woes. I think that's perfect. So, when I started out from college, I didn't exactly have, well, money, I kind
As
of
we do.
yeah. So I went through college, and I was able to go through college because of like loans, student loans, which not really ideal, but I guess that's the way it goes. So outside of college, it was basically like instantaneously, well, I am on my own. No one is paying for any bills. I have to eat food and pay rent or I'm going to die. So, it was just basically straight from that to just doing freelance art. This is before I got a job as a security guard, but, just doing what we could to survive. I got to make him sexy. He's going to have a bra or something. So, so I guess to sum that up, I never really had any reservoir of financial resources. And I was always like, I watched like Dave Ramsey when I was in high school. Like, my parents were like into that. And it's like, oh, you got to save. You have to get investments. You got to like save X% of your income. So I was always, even as a kid, I was of the mindset of like, I would save up like my allowance for mowing lawns and stuff all year long. And then finally in the summer, I would have like $80. So when we went on vacation, I'd be able to like look and buy the coolest of the toys at the beach store, like plastic sharks. So I always had the mindset of saving, and I still kind of have that like definite mindset. I like the idea of like building up some sort of financial stability. I guess after 15 years, I'm maybe a little closer to that than I've ever been before, which is very, very, very much of a relief. It's nice to be getting close to 40 and being like, hey, I have a little more than when I was 24. That's probably good. But in the meantime, we did have a good number of just total disasters happen. Stuff that we obviously couldn't really plan for and we couldn't really avoid. Like everything from, we don't need to get into like nitty gritty, like poor me details, but everything from hospitalizations to getting hit by trucks to having like our... Oh yeah, well I can tell that story really quick just because that's fun. If you never heard that story.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I'll tell about the time that I got hit by a truck because that's a funny story. It's like no fun when Liz got hit by a truck. But
wait, you both got hit by a truck?
You landed pretty well. The college one, yeah, the college one you landed pretty well, but like the one up here in Michigan, that was just, that was painful and.
Wait, you.
A jingle sound. Omega Jaeger VA, thank you for the new subscription. Oh, Charlie, thank you for gifting subs, man. You are fantastic.
I don't want to play down the injury. I hope you were fine, right? But it's just sort of interesting meeting people who've been hit by trucks. Two people who love each other, both hit by trucks, and one of them multiple times. Like, that's quite unique.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe we're dumb. But Fortunately, my story has a happy ending. Liz, like, she's fine now, but at the time there was like, some unfortunate injuries. We had to do some recovery time. But for me, ironically, the time that I got hit by a truck, it was my last day on the job. Literally my last day on the job as a security guard. And I was running home because this is when we were living in Columbus. We were both working and doing Dreamkeepers, trying to get Dreamkeepers up and about. And after Volume 3 came out, Volume 3 did well enough that finally I was able to actually start going full-time on Dreamkeepers for the first time ever. So I was really psyched about that. But until then, we were both working jobs, and we only had one car, and my workplace was closer than her workplace, so I would just jog 2 miles to and from work every day. Plus, I was like, hey, at the time, I can't afford the gym, so this will help keep me in shape. I'll just run to and from work. So, of course, the last day of work, the last day where this is the last time I will ever have to jog this 2 mile stretch back from work. So of course it is dark and it is sleeting because it is in the middle of winter. So there's just like this frozen rain pouring down. And I've run through sleet before. I'm used to it. It's fine. But the thing is that made the visibility absolutely garbage for the cars that were driving on the road. And the route to my work, it goes down this busy, busy road. I mean, this is the busiest road in Columbus, Broad Street. So it's jam-packed with traffic. So as soon as I go to run by like these little crossroads that come off of Broad Street, every time I'm just keeping an eye on the road because I'm like, okay, I don't want a car to turn into me. All right, got past this crossroad. Okay, here comes another one. I don't want a car to turn into me. Okay, cool, I got past this crossroad. Well, one time I was jogging past this crossroad, and my reflexes were not that good because this was like, a ways into this like frozen sleet runs, so I was literally kind of frozen up. And then there's so much heavy traffic that this truck like was like I have some sympathy for them because they're like, okay, I gotta jet and do this left turn real quick because otherwise I won't be able to do it. So right when I'm in the middle of this crossroad, this truck like zips right towards me, and I just have time to be like, oh no, there's no way I can leap forward or back enough to avoid this thing. It's coming at me. So all I could do was decide, okay, where on my body is it going to hit me? So I was able to like spring up just a little bit, and it hit me in the hip and threw me like, it felt like 30 feet, but I think it was more like 20 feet. And the 20 feet, to be fair, also includes me rolling on the pavement. So it wasn't that bad. But oh man, so I flew through the air, hit the ground, and this lady pops out of the truck. Oh my! And I felt bad because I was like, oh no, I've upset this poor woman. So I stand up real slow because I'm like, am I okay? I don't know. Let's find out. And so I stand up, and it's like I'm sort of like test one leg out, and it's like, does my knees hurt? Does my ankles hurt? I test the other leg out, and I'm like, actually, I think I'm fine. I think I'm all good. And she's like, oh my gosh, are you? I feel so bad. Are you okay? And then I see her truck. I left a huge freaking dent in the hood of her truck. And so I'm just like, oh my God, I hope she doesn't see that dent. And I'm like, ma'am, it's all right. I will safely walk home. Just get in your truck without looking at the front and go about your way. Things were good. And so I calmed her down. She drove home. And then I remember, it's so cheesy talking about it later, but I remember literally thinking to myself, like, well, I got hit by a truck, but what am I going to do? Walk the rest of the way home? Because I still have Dreamkeepers to do, and I'm not going to get Dreamkeepers done if I walk home. So I'm going to run home, and I'm going to do more Dreamkeepers because I got home faster. So I ran the rest of the way home, and that was me getting hit by a truck. And I must have got it like at just the right. I took the hit right at like the meaty part of my thigh. So I think my thunder hips basically absorbed all the impact, and that kept me safe.
My God, you're one tough man full of dedication.
I don't know, like I can't really say that because if I did get hurt, I don't think I would have been running home if I was actually hurt. So we could just as easily say I am really lucky. That might just be me being really lucky. I don't want to test it out and experiment with more trucks and be like, let's see, how tough am I? Am I tough enough that this will consistently save me from trucks? Like I don't want to find out.
Yeah, it's not a thing worth testing out.
Yeah.
I don't know, sometimes things like these happen, but it may not be something that you should learn from. Maybe the lady was just too panicky during her drives, and this was a sort of risk-free way of teaching her, hey, be more careful. You were just the secondary character in this story that got in trouble, but not hurt, thankfully.
Yeah, exactly. So that might have actually made her a safer driver for future reference. So it might have made the world a better place. And actually, this particular getting hit by a truck story, I guess that's a happy ending because this does not fit into the topic of financial disasters. Because I actually was not injured at all.
Thankfully.
Oddly enough, I didn't even have it. It might have helped I was wearing like a Kevlar vest at the time. But I was not injured at all, so I didn't have any hospital bills. There was no weird insurance cost. So we haven't been so lucky at other times. And again, probably one of the biggest financial hits that we did take was when we went out of town to a wedding, and when we were out of town, someone in the apartment complex started a fire that burned down the entire building, including all of our inventory for a Prelude collection Kickstarter that we had just completed. So we lost tons and tons of inventory. It was like just a huge hit to Vivid. Lost everything that we owned, except for like our toothbrushes and our wallets because we had those with us when we went to the wedding.
How did you recover from that? What was your process?
Well, the first process was to get a new apartment as quickly as possible. So we went ahead and did that, and fortunately I was able to work with the leasing office. Fortunately, for like a week or two, Liz's parents let us crash with them, but then, it was like, okay, we got to get a place back up. So I talked to the apartment complex, got something negotiated. And then the next step after that was really, I don't know, we just took it one thing at a time. we did have renter's insurance, so we had to file a claim and try to like document all the stuff that we owned potentially, and that didn't really cover for it, but it helped.
And from the side of the comic, right? Because you had a Kickstarter going on, so how did you approach the task of going to people like, "Hey, our house burned down, everything's lost. Like, what now?"
Fortunately, I delivered on that Kickstarter before the fire, so we got the books. I mailed them out as quick as I could, and then I was like, "Hooray! We delivered a Kickstarter." That's also the Kickstarter where I learned don't mail glass. Because one of the rewards in that Kickstarter was like, oh, original art from the Prelude collection, framed in glass, and a lot of those glass frames did not make it intact. So that's when I learned, okay, David, don't mail glass. That's dumb. Don't do that again.
Yeah.
We got some packages returned where you could just like you pick up the package and you could hear like, and it's like, oh, that's not gonna be safe inside. So, but fortunately, I did have all the stuff mailed out and delivered to people before the fire. Unfortunately, a lot of that campaign, we were like, oh, let's invest in like a few extra copies of Prelude. Well, not a few extra copies. Let's invest in like a bunch of extra Prelude collection copies. And that way we can take that profit and turn it into even more profit when we sell those books over like the next 2 to 3 years. Like that was kind of the plan, was like sell those at conventions and on the website over the next 2 to 3 years. And, but then all those books disappeared, poof. So that was no longer an option. And I don't even really know exactly how we recovered financially, business-wise. I guess we just kept on going and kept on working on Volume 5. That was the main saving grace, was we had off-site backup with Carbonite. So I did not lose any files. I did not lose any progress on Volume 5. And even all of the drawings I had of Volume 5 that I hadn't colored yet, we still had the scans backed up off-site. So every single bit of work on Volume 5, I did not lose any progress on Volume 5. Or actually, at that time, no, it was Volume 4. Because we were pretty close to releasing Volume 4. So yeah, it was Volume 4, and I didn't lose any of the progress. And I was like, thank goodness I didn't lose any of this progress. Just all the original art. But so we just got back to work making comics, and I don't know. So I guess my big theme on disasters and hits to businesses and stuff is it'll probably happen. If you can build up any financial reserves, that is absolutely advisable and excellent. I would recommend you do that if you can. If you can't, like, I don't know, just if something happens and you have a big loss, it sucks, but don't freak out. Just keep on going. Because I mean, that's what we did. I don't really have any gigantic words of advice or brilliant strategies. We just kept on going. We just kept on drawing, and we decided, like, yeah, let's just move forward as best we can, and that's where our focus was.
I mean, I'm thankful for all the info you're giving me. I have no experience yet with these problems, but I'm sure when they come, I'll be very thankful for all the help I could get.
Cool. I'm glad if any of it's helpful. I know. I mean, it kind of sounds so trite to be like, oh, well, when terrible things happen, here's what I did: not give up. You're welcome. Like, I don't know how actionable that is, but honestly, if you can adopt just an attitude of resolve and moving forward and trying to, like, if something bad happens, the thing itself is bad enough. Try not to make it worse by just like marinating it in it and punishing yourself and like, dwelling on how terrible it is, because it's like, yeah, it's terrible. So, try to move forward towards something that's less terrible, and hopefully that works out. I mean, the only thing you can do is the best thing that you can do, right? So just realize that the stuff that's out of your hands, you can't control it, and that's okay. Just focus on what you can control and take it one step at a time. So that's just the thing, is don't freak out, don't give up, just do the best thing that you can do, and keep on doing that. And at the end of the day, you can kind of rest easy because you know that you have done everything that you can reasonably do.
Yeah, and I wouldn't even worry about saying basic stuff, just like, oh, hang in there, do your work, because even these simple pieces of advice can go a long way, especially if you're not just thinking them, but you actually hear them from someone else, from someone who has a lot of experience behind them. it's just sometimes really reassuring to hear even the most basic facts, the most basic advice from someone else. It can help a ton, especially when times are bad.
Yeah, and I guess maybe that adds a little more assistance to the advice too. Is if people understand that, I'm not just like saying this from some lofty ivory perch of like, oh, in theory, if anything bad ever happens, take my advice and just be happy and whistle a merry tune. You're welcome. It's like we've actually gone through a lot of rough stuff, and so we're sort of speaking from a place of experience and saying, bad things are going to happen. That's life. Bad things are going to happen to us. Probably more bad things. Bad things are going to happen to you. Bad things happen to everybody.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's not great, but you know what? Just don't give up. Just focus on doing the good that you can. And if it's any consolation, we've had tons of bad stuff happen, and that attitude, it does help. It does make it not easy, but it makes it easier. And, most of the stuff, if you can survive it, you can get through it.
When it comes to copyright and licensing,
Yes.
do you need to copyright or license the name, the brand of your comic? Is there a time for that? What could, if there's any problems that could arise from that? And what's your experience with copyright and Dreamkeepers and the brand?
I'm going to just sort of do a bit of a crash course on copyright and stuff. Although I should start off by saying, because when it gets into this subject matter, everyone always does, and I'm assuming they do it for a good reason, so I'll just follow suit. I'll remind everybody that I am not an attorney. I've never passed the bar exam. I've never even studied for the bar exam. So I can't really say that this is legal advice. This is just David's personal impression of how the law works. So take it with a grain of salt.
It's good practice to say this.
Yeah. Again, everybody always says that, and so I'm assuming that there's got to be some weird lawyer thing where if you're like, yeah, here's some legal advice, suddenly there's going to be an earthquake, and from the depths of hell, an attorney will rise and be like, aha, you gave advice as an attorney, but you're not. Now your soul is mine. And it's like, oh, man.
Yeah, you never know.
If it's not that, it's something like that. But anyways, now that we've cleared that particular hurdle, I would say copyright and trademark and licenses and branding. They're all kind of different things, so I'll just define them all briefly and kind of how I imagine that they work. So copyright it's a little more broad. It covers creative stuff. You can have a copyright on a character design or on a story or on a book itself or on the premise for your comic. So copyright is broad. It can cover a screenplay, it can cover all kinds of stuff. And a lot of people think oh, I have to register for a copyright, otherwise somebody could steal my work. And technically, as soon as you make something that is original and unique, technically copyright just automatically covers it. If you make something that's yours, then according to the law, you have the right to make copies of it, and somebody else does not have the right to make copies of it.
Of course, it depends on the country, but I think in America and in the EU, it's standard practice that it goes like this.
Yeah, and I mean, actually, on that note, all I can really speak to is my experience in the United States. I have as little as I know American law, I know other countries' laws even less. So I don't know how things would work in other locations. But the way I understand it, copyright is sort of automatic. You don't have to register in order to get your work technically corrected under copyright. Of course, that technicality is kind of important, because if you make something and then you stuff it in a sock drawer and no one ever knows about it, and then some guy goes out and publishes the same exact thing, if you pull that out of your sock drawer and you're like, hey, I have a copyright to this. I made it 5 years ago when I was in grade school. Well, if you can't prove when you made that thing in your sock drawer, then it doesn't really help you against that guy, because he can say, no, I made it first. Look, you probably just made that 10 seconds ago. So What you do want to do is you want to put your copyrighted material out there in some way where there's a timestamp on it. That could be something as simple as mailing it to yourself, and then there's a postmark on there, and then you don't open it. A lot of times, even if you post it on your website, post it on an art account, there's going to be a timestamp on there, and that's there you go. That's proof that you are the person that made that thing at that point in time.
Yeah, here I'd like to just add a little something from my own experience. When it comes to this sort of like reserving ideas and stuff, I'd like to just warn people that this isn't sort of a call to arms like, oh, every good idea you have, you should create a drawing of and post it on the internet. Because I personally had a sort of a fear when I started thinking about this idea of a story, alright? Like, oh, friends go on adventure, blah, 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 blah. Like, what if somebody steals it? Like, I'm learning art, this is gonna take some time. What if somebody in that time comes and does the exact same thing? Like, what am I gonna do then? And my advice is, if what you're making is in any way special to you or like it in general, most likely nobody else is gonna do it. And if somebody is going to do the exact same thing you were gonna do, then it probably wasn't that special. And I really don't recommend panicking and trying to get every little aspect of your story or ideas copyrighted, because it's just extra work and it's not gonna end up doing anything in the end, in my opinion.
Yeah, and plus, if you like, it's one thing to sort of put stuff out there that's not fully formed, because there's a risk that could inspire somebody, and then they could even do their own thing, and arguably it might not be covered under copyright law if it's not sufficiently specific to be a unique thing.
You might accidentally kick your own legs down by creating something that inspires someone to go from that to make something similar.
Yeah, like for example, if like someone put an idea out there like, oh, I'm thinking about a story and it involves like a band of heroes struggling against evil. There, that's copyright. I put it out there. Now no one can ever tell a story that involves a band of heroes struggling against evil. That's me. That's my idea. Because like, well, that's so vague that it just doesn't apply. But so that's one thing is copyright doesn't really apply if something is super vague. It has to be specific sufficiently to be like identifiable as not the same as everything else. So, but so when would you want to register for a copyright? Registering a copyright, it does take money. Make sure you're not falling for a scam. Make sure you're doing it through like a .gov website if you're in America, I guess. But basically, you just mail stuff to the Library of Congress. You pay the registration fee, and the purpose of registering a copyright is just so that it's more evidence that it was made by you at a certain time frame. So if someone does try to totally plagiarize or rip it off, or some other business starts like somehow they've gotten a hold of your book files and they're printing your book files, or they're even hiring artists to like steal your characters with like a different story. If there's like a legitimate violation of copyright and you're like, oh, yeah, they're stealing my stuff like blatantly, I actually really need to take them to court. Like that's when it's good to have your stuff registered, because if it has been registered in the past, that's like really, really good evidence that you could prevail upon in court if you were trying to prove that, you made it first.
Yeah.
So that's basically the story with copyright, is you kind of have to get it out there somewhere where you can demonstrate that you're the one that made it initially. It has to be sufficiently specific to be covered under copyright law, but you don't necessarily have to register with the Library of Congress in order to get copyright law applying to and protecting what you have created. So I guess the next term is trademark, and a trademark is not the same thing as a copyright. I think a lot of people get confused, but a trademark is like literally the mark that you put on your products to show that it's your company and not some other company. So like Ford would like the Ford logo and like the Ford name would be like a trademark. Or like some like slogans, if someone uses a slogan all the time, like, oh, it's the quicker picker upper or whatever. If you see a little like circle R when that slogan is around, then that means that R stands for registered, which means it is a federally registered trademark. Like, for example, even Vivid Publishing, like the logo of our publishing company, Vivid, since that is the stamp that we put on all of our books, it actually is a federally registered trademark. So, like, another company couldn't just take that same stamp and start putting that on their books, because that would literally be deceptive to customers. Because, like, it's because it's the mark of our company, literally, and that's what a trademark is.
And so, how would you approach getting a trademark registered? Is it something you have to go to, let's say, a court of yours, or is it something you can do online?
It's something you can do online, and you basically go to uspto.gov, I believe is the website. I don't know if I'm remembering it off the top of my head, but it's the U.S. Patents and Trademarks division of the government. So you have to go there, and filing for a trademark is pretty expensive. It's going to run you like, I think last I checked, it was $250. It might be more than that now. And on top of that, they do have to vet trademarks a little more aggressively than just like a copyright thing for the Library of Congress, because they can't actually publish a trademark until they verify that, it's not being used by someone else. So they actually do have to have their staff review it. It can take quite a long time. And so they're going to look through their database of symbols and word marks and, just make sure that you're not accidentally selecting something that is already effectively trademarked.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing, too, with the trademark is once you have a trademark, you kind of have to then make sure that you police it. Like, for example, I think this happened with escalators. Like, there's escalators are like those stairs that move, right?
Yeah.
I might be remembering the story wrong, but the gist of it, like the point of it holds. I believe at one point, escalator was actually not what those things were called. They were called like moving stairs or whatever. And escalator was a company, like a brand name of a company that made them. But everyone started calling them escalators, even when they were made by other companies. And like in the version of this story, I don't know if I'm recounting it totally accurate to history, but in the version of this story, to make the point, the company Escalator never corrected people, and the people kept on using the word escalator wrong until finally it entered common language usage. And so then when they were suddenly like, no, our company is called Escalator. No one else can call it an escalator. At that point, they actually had a court ruling on it, and the ruling was like, no, since this has entered common usage and you never put up a fuss before, this is just what people call those things now. So your company brand name is effectively no longer applicable uniquely to you. And so that is
be on the watch out, because it can be like, nope, you snows, you lows. Sorry, too late.
Yeah, so exactly, you snows, you lows. And that's why places like Nintendo are so aggressive about like anything with like their branding on it or their company on it, like anything with their logo. They're like, no. Like it's Nintendo is us. Nintendo is not you. If you're using that, then you have to take it down. Because the thing is, if they
infamous for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think maybe they're a little overly zealous about it, because it seems to me like they do stuff that applies to not even just to trademarks and brand and like logos. They do stuff that applies to like characters and copyright too, which
they go a bit too hard.
Yeah, they do, but like that's the rationale for their attorneys. Well, we have to literally police our brand, because if someone else starts using our trademarks and we don't object to it, then we could actually lose the rights to our own trademark. So at that point, you have to like tell people, like, hey, you're not allowed to, like, even like we have a little experience in that, and I don't like to like shut people down and stuff, but once you're maintaining a trademark, you kind of have to, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that is. Go ahead.
If you could share the experience, it would be very nice, because I was just about to ask, like, do you have any experience in, like, or how do you police this? Like, do you just go every half a month or a month, just Google, like, Vivid Publishing, and if something else comes up, you just look at it, and if it's not you, then you just take it down? Or what's your experience? How do you police it?
Well, for policing, like for, say, Vivid Publishing, like there is some stuff that also uses the phrase Vivid. I think there's like Vivid Entertainment, I believe, is like a porno company. And the thing is, I think they actually predate Vivid Publishing, or at least they predate our trademark. But since porno is way, way different from, just a cartoon graphic novel, it's the sort of thing where we're not in the same field necessarily. And so there's a low risk of customer confusion, because that's one of the criteria that that they use in the court system and in just in trademarks in general, is like is this going to confuse customers? Like if you have your own trademark and it's your own logo and you're running a company, if someone else starts using the same name, is it really going to confuse customers? So this like Vivid Entertainment Company, like when people go there and they see like a bunch of porn, they're not going to be confused and be like, "What? I don't understand. Where is Mace? Where is Whip? What about their adventures with the nightmares?" It's like, no, people are going there for something totally different. Or like, let's say there was like a food company that had like Vivid Burritos, you know, like so intense your intestines will never feel the same. Like there's not really any risk of customers confusing our product lines. So in that case, you don't really need to do anything because it doesn't really apply. However, if there was, for example, a publishing company that was doing comics, and then they're like, "Hey, let's call ourselves Vivid Publishing. Why not?" Yeah, and oh, let's use this cool logo that's like, you know, what if it was like an open book that looked like a V and it had a keyhole, like you're unlocking a good story? That would be really cool. Let's do that. You know, we got to kind of like monitor the internet periodically for that. And if there was someone that was doing that, it's like, okay, well, that's literally our logo and the name of our comic company. And if they're doing a comic company and using that logo, it's like, well, at that point, if we want to keep our trademark, we have to let them know. It's like, hey guys, sorry to crash the party, but we're already using this. Customers recognize it. So if you could pick something out that, you know, would be more unique to you, then that way we can avoid like having to do a cease and desist.
Yeah, and this is very important that you chose this approach, that it's always nice to be nice, right? Even if somebody's like infringing on your name or trademark, there's no reason to be mad at him. Most likely they don't even know about it, so just approach them calm. You don't want to make any more trouble than there already is.
Exactly. And I mean, and I don't want to get into like detail on anything and like be like, oh, this one guy once we had to send him a note because again, exactly as you said, I think most of the time people, maybe they just didn't like do a search for it. They're just like making stuff up and having fun, and then they realize, oh, someone else has told me that they already had this name. Oops.
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're not that well known, you can't expect everybody to know you.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think Liz was saying, like Facebook is getting into a little trouble with their new business name, Meta. Turns out someone else already had that name. So that's kind of cute. But yeah, basically, if you do like bump into someone that's like, if you have a trademark, if you have a federally registered trademark, and someone else is, you know, doing something that's like too similar in the same field, don't be a jerk to them, but, you know, do let them know, hey, this is a similar thing. It's going to confuse customers, so we'd have to ask you not to use this. We have it trademarked. Just let them know politely. And 99% of the time, they're going to be like, oops, thanks for letting me know. And if you catch it early enough, you know, they haven't like done a whole ton of business under that name, so that's better for them too. And if there is like a 1% of the time where they're like, no, screw off, I will use this trademarked image regardless. At that point, it's like, well, nuts. I'm running a business. I have to protect this trademark, so now I have to file an actual cease and desist letter. And then, you know, it just like kicks into the legal process, which sucks, but that's how it has to happen.
Yeah. You gotta do what you gotta do.
So that's copyright, that's trademark. Man, my quick overview is way longer than I thought it was going to be. Let me hit
no problem.
Licensing and branding real quick, because licensing is a little more of a simple idea. Basically, a license is just giving somebody permission to do something. So, like, let's say there was a dude who was like, hey, I'd love to print off Dreamkeepers in, like, Uzbekistani language. Can I do that? I'd be like, well, normally you can't, because you don't have the right to copy Dreamkeepers, you know, because we have the copyright. Mm-hmm. But we could always give them permission. And so that's what a license is. We'd be like, well, we will give you a license to print it in Uzbekistani. And at that point, we just agree to the terms of the license. It's like, you know, you can keep X%, or you have to give us like 15 squirrels for us to extend this license to you. We want 15 squirrels real bad. Excuse me. Don't ask why. Don't ask questions. So, and, you know, the conditions of the license, basically it's whatever you want to write in there, whatever you want to write in your like little agreement contract thing. So that's really all a license is. A license is just a formal agreement that you are letting somebody use a portion of your copyright for a specific thing. So, for example, we've had like license agreements with 3D sculptors where we're like, hey, we will give you a license to use the likeness of our characters. You can 3D sculpt them. And normally you would not have the right to sell copies of those figurines, but we will give you a license to sell copies of those figurines. Or we will have the license, you can make them and then we will sell them and share profit. So that's all a license is. A license is just a contract where you give another entity specific and limited permission to use a component of your copyrighted material. And it's usually good in those, of course, to put some sort of a time limit in there. So you don't want to like accidentally sign away your own rights permanently by mistake. You don't want to be like, yes, I'll give you permission in Uzbekistani to print this. And then they're like, print it forever? We have it in writing. We have permission to do it. Now we're going to print it in Uzbekistani for all of time. Even if and who knows, maybe something goes wrong. Maybe they never send you a single squirrel and you're like, I want someone else to print it in Uzbekistani. Well, if there was no kind of limit or conditions in that license agreement. So, you just got to make sure to like think through the nature of the license agreements at that point.
Be careful.
Yeah. Just be careful. It's usually good policy to put like a sunset provision in there. Like, whatever you're doing, like, after X number of years, all rights revert back to the original copyright holder, which is me. So, and then, and if it was really good and you want to keep working with that person and like the 5 years go by, then you could just be like, okay, here's a new license agreement. We're going to do this again. Boom, problem solved.
Yeah, and let's say somebody approaches me. I have a comic. I have it for a few years, and they're like, "Okay, we'd like to print it in Uzbekistani."
Sure.
How would I approach creating the license? Is there some template somewhere on the internet, or is it literally a piece of paper that I just write? Like, I give you this blah blah blah, signed A3 and signature for him.
Like
or is there an official paper somewhere?
The best way to approach it, is kind of like a do as I say and not as I do category. The best way to approach it, honestly, would just be to get a hold of an attorney and have an attorney help draft something up, because it's kind of tricky situations. You don't want to overlook something important. They do
get some professional help just in case.
Yeah, I would advise like professional help to be on the safe side. They do have boilerplate agreements online, so there are like things you can look at. So I mean, if you can work with that and save a good amount of money on attorney's fees and stuff, I'm not going to say don't do it ever, but like the smart thing to do is if you're not confident about it, it would be wise to consult a legal professional. And I guess the last term would be that was in this basket. There's copyright, trademark, licensing, and then branding. And branding is probably like not so much like these other things are sort of nuts and bolts legal terms. Branding is more of like just the psychological impression that your company provides to customers. So it's a lot more intangible. It can cover a lot more things. Like branding can involve like your product, the characters in your story, like the quality of your product, your customer service or lack of customer service. It can like involve like your social media behavior. So branding is just sort of like everything that contributes to a customer's impression of your company. Like that's kind of branding. So it's like a big sort of like impression management, and it's really just at the core about communication and trying to make sure that like what are people thinking about my comic, or what are people thinking about my company or me, and why do they think that, or why should they think that, or why shouldn't they think that. And I guess another way to think of it is to realize that everybody is having impressions of things. Everyone has impressions of people. So everyone has some kind of a brand, even if it's a limited brand. Everyone has a brand. It's just most people are not using self-awareness with what their brand is. So most people are just kind of going out there and, doing their thing and being themselves. And like, we do care about how other people think of us, but they're probably like the average person is probably not consciously thinking of themselves in terms of like a brand. Although actually with social media, that is probably happening now more than it ever has in the past, of like just kind of typical people like literally branding themselves or thinking about themselves in terms of a brand. And like obviously like a logo can be part of a brand, but it's not like the definition of a brand. Like, a logo can be literally like a brand on cattle. That's where the word comes from. But it's definitely more than just a logo. So it's sort of like a nebula of impressions that customers have about what you're doing and what you're putting out there. So it's just a very, very big topic, and it's just good to sort of start being aware of like what their impression is, and it is important too. The more the more scope you want to have with what you're doing, probably the more important it is, because like as unfair as it is, these like quick like large scale impressions are kind of what people use to make their choices and make their decisions. So, and that's why someone like Marvel and DC, like that's why they can, like, I guess I'll just say my impression is they kind of coast on their brand because for years and years and years they had so much good content come out from them, and then so people like just built up this brand of like, oh yeah, professional comics. That's Marvel and DC. Those are the guys that make professional comics. That's what I think of them. And they've been putting some stuff out there that people have not been liking as much, and so slowly it takes a lot of time to, I guess, destroy a brand, but it is possible. It is possible to change a brand. So that's kind of like, you sort of like don't want that to happen in a bad way. Instead you want to have like a positive impression on how people view you, because at a glance that's going to be when people are choosing, oh, am I going to check out this comic or what this guy is doing? Or, even someone like Reagan, he's not like an established corporation like Marvel or DC, but if you think about his personal brand, like, and I'm just like spitballing here, like I think of high quality artwork, I think of dreams, down to earth, authentic, and again, like really appealing characters, like a focus on storyline, a good book that is in the future.
Yeah, I mean, his style is really like when somebody says Reagan or Wyatt, like boom, I just see orange. I see the beautiful edges, the style. Like, yeah, it's all there. It's all in the head.
Even that specific color, that orange, like that, like sort of like warm, ready orange, that is branding too. Like, because that color association is inherent to Reagan Lodge.
Yeah, it's part of the feeling you get when you think about it.
Exactly. So he's not like a giant corporation or anything, but like if one way you could put it is like his successful branding, like the all these impressions I have of him and his work, like all kind of wrapped up. Like that's why the decision is already made. When his book comes out, I want to support his book, like because of all that branding. So, and stuff like that, if it's being done successfully. Very rarely is it an accident. Usually it's because someone is conscious of it and they are trying to make sure that they're doing at least a good job of it. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I've been pretty good with like logos and stuff for Vivid and Dream Keepers, but even I think I could even probably try to improve and get a little sharper. And that's the other thing is like whatever you're going into, if it's independent art especially, you're always going to be improving. You're never going to like be there. You're never going to be like, oh, I've developed a skill. I've got it. I'm awesome. I can stop trying now. It's like, no, there's always ways to get better. There's always ways to improve. There's always ways to get better at drawing. There's always ways to get better at crafting like a good story or an interesting plot. There's always ways to get better at like branding and communication and like getting the value of your content to people that would actually enjoy it. Like that's one of the things that's exciting about going into independent art and business as a career is like there's like no limit to how good you can get at stuff, and you can just keep on trying and improving as you go.
Yeah, I mean part of the journey I've been on is at the start I was like, okay, I have this comic idea, I want to draw it. Okay, I want to start getting good at drawing. Okay, so when am I going to release the comic? Well, I have 5 years of high school. 5 years, sounds reasonable. I could get the gist of things. Like, it's not gonna be good, it's not gonna be perfect, but it's enough. Now I'm like when I was in the 3rd to 4th year, I was like, yeah, okay, this is actually working out better than I thought. I might actually like be pretty comfortable with the release and stuff. Now I'm reaching like the half point of the last year, and I'm like, yeah, nah, it's not gonna be a comfortable release, definitely not, but it's not gonna be perfect ever. So, might as well start now. And a lot of people say it like, you learn along the way. It's okay to start imperfect.
Oh, totally. I mean, even if you look at early Dreamkeepers, like early Prelude, early Volume 1, some of the art's pretty rough.
There's definitely a big visual change from, for example, the first volume and the fourth. Like, I have the books side by side. Yeah, you can see the change. And it's like, whoa, he's been working on it for so long. Like, this change took time. Like, it's it makes you feel okay with not being perfect and letting that change happen over time.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I've even like deliberately kind of thought like, oh, do I want to try to keep the style identical to when it started, and I decided, like, no, because I feel like I can get better. I feel like there is a style here that I'm trying to sort of unearth, and I feel like I'm not there yet, and that's okay. But it means I want to stay flexible to hopefully get better and better and kind of excavate that style more and more effectively as I go on. So yeah, it's not a bad thing to start out less perfect. Like that's where everyone starts, and if you're not starting there, then you're not starting at all.
Sometimes it's just important to start. Like back what I was saying, the advice from people like, hey, start right now. Like, okay, I didn't start 5 years ago, but I gave myself this time. Like, okay, it's still not gonna be good. I'm still not gonna be like, okay, I'm ready. Like, I'm not. I'm probably gonna spend a lot of time tinkering with the designs and stuff. There's gonna be a bunch of trouble with the release, but I gotta start. I can't put it off anymore because I'll get into this cycle of just like later, and it's never gonna get there. So just 5 years. They're almost up. Let's go.
I've even seen like this can be a trap too sometimes with artists of they'll improve and then they'll say like, oh man, my first book, it was not very good, or my first comics, they're so bad compared to my new ones. I'll just go back and redo the start. And like sometimes that can be fine. I'm not going to say that like no one should ever do that, but it is kind of like a danger zone because once you open that Pandora's box, when do you stop? You don't want to necessarily get trapped into redoing your first book over and over and over, because that can happen. You could be like, there we go, now my first book is better, moving on. Oh, now my second book needs to be redone. Okay, my second book is better, moving on. Wait, now I'm so much better than I was when I did first book version 2.0. Let's go back and, so...
I mean, definitely could be a loop. I'd say if you want to go back and redo some of the old stuff, I'd say keep that as a bonus activity. As you have your prelude, I'd say always focus on what's going on now. Keep going further and further with the story, and keep the revising as a bonus, right? Because if you're a reader, you don't really care that much that like, oh, the first book is being remade, meanwhile you're sitting here for a year or more, just the story not going anywhere, stagnant. You just lose interest.
Yeah, like it already takes enough production time to make comics in the first place, so it definitely can be. Again, I'm not going to tell people never do it. It's like people got to make their own choices, but just understand it can be a big trade-off to stop your forward progression on creating a story, just to sort of like bring earlier editions up to the current standards.
Yeah, everybody's gonna make their own mistakes. I'm gonna make plenty. I'm sure of that.
Yeah, and I mean it's not even always a mistake. There might be times where it's like the right call to do it. I'm not really in a position to like judge every single artist and what they do, but I would just encourage any artists that feel the urge to go back and change their earlier work. It's like, if you're going to do it, just just be careful not to get into an endless loop, and sort of understand that there's a little bit of a trade-off in forward momentum. And if it's still worth it for you after you make that assessment, then go for it.
Yeah, and one thing I've learned with art, never be afraid of mistakes, because they're just learning opportunities.
Oh yeah, and that is an excellent philosophy to keep with it.
Alright folks, and that's everything. I am very thankful Mr. David was here to share his advice with us, and I hope you found it just as useful as I did. Again, any useful links will be left in the description, and when it comes to future interviews, I'll do my best to put up at least 1 or 2 more interviews till the end of the year, hopefully. So until then, see you and have a great day.